Sherlock Holmes and the Phantom of Mortemont, an honoring audiobook's original story from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D. Chapter 1, The Island of Dark Tidings. It was in the spring of 1892, when the fogs had at last relented over London, that Holmes, ever restless in the absence of work, proposed what he styled a restorative excursion of the body and a sedative of the mind. For my part, I considered both the terms and their applicability to Sherlock Holmes equally dubious, but the notion of a sea voyage was not unwelcome. My health, which had suffered somewhat during the long winter, might well benefit from salt air and unbroken horizons. Thus, we found ourselves aboard the Cynthia, a sturdy steamer bound from Portsmouth, on a leisurely circuit of the Channel Islands and beyond. Holmes was no seaman. He tolerated the swaying decks and the smell of coal smoke only because they were an escape from London's choking air. I watched him stand at the rail, tall and spare, his aquiline features drawn into sharper lines by the salt wind. He smoked incessantly, his pipe clenched like a permanent appendage, and observed not the sea itself, but the faces of our fellow passengers, noting their peculiarities with that inward light in his eyes, which I had come to associate with the birth of conjecture. "Observe that fellow near the gangway, Watson," he remarked on our third day. "He tells his companions that he has never been at sea before, yet note the stance, legs apart, knees slightly bent, a man habituated to the deck. You suggest he is a sailor?" "Retired naval, more likely. The tattoo beneath his cuff, half visible, suggests a frigate of the Mediterranean squadron. But more to the point, he is here under false pretenses. Why, I wonder? And why should he conceal so trivial a thing as experience at sea? You must contrive to rest your mind," said I, laughing. "You will find yourself constructing a murder before we reach Jersey." Holmes only smiled, that tight, enigmatic smile, which meant that his thoughts were already 2 steps beyond my jest. It was upon the morning of the 4th day that the Cynthia encountered difficulties of a sort not uncommon to such vessels. The engines had developed some defect, an issue with the condenser, the captain informed us, and we were compelled to make harbor at a small island off the coast of Brittany. The place was unnamed on my charts, though the captain called it by the Breton appellation of Ile de Mortemont. "A bleak little place," said he. "Few inhabitants, save fishermen and a tavern of sorts. We may be here the day, perhaps 2. Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden animation, as though the prospect of isolation from civilization was, perversely, an invitation to discovery. "Come, Watson," said he, "let us stretch our legs ashore. There is more of the world in a single village than in all the smoke-stained columns of Fleet Street." We disembarked in the ship's boat and soon found ourselves on a pebbled strand. The village lay but a few hundred yards inland, a clutch of stone cottages crouching against the hillside like weather-beaten conspirators. The tavern, which announced itself by a swinging sign depicting a cracked bell, was the largest structure, its roof steep, its windows clouded with age. Inside, the air was heavy with smoke and the mingled odors of tar, ale, and sea salt. Rough wooden tables were occupied by fishermen, their dark eyes regarding us with curiosity not untouched by suspicion. At the far end, behind the counter, stood a woman of middle years, broad of shoulder and stern of aspect, who greeted us with a nod but no smile. Holmes removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "2 tankards of your local ale, if you please, madam," said he. I followed him to a corner table, where we seated ourselves. I confess that I relished the prospect of a pint and a moment of repose, but Holmes's gaze roved the room with restless energy, cataloging faces, gestures, and snatches of dialect, as though each were a clue in a hidden case. It was not long before an incident occurred which gave shape to the day. A sudden hush fell upon the tavern as the door creaked open and a man entered. He was of unusual appearance, tall, with a mane of black hair and a long coat of weather-stained serge. His eyes darted about the room, alighting briefly upon each face. Before settling on ours, he made straight for our table, dragging a chair without so much as a "by your leave." "You are Englishmen," said he, in a voice low yet urgent. "That is self-evident," Holmes replied, his tone cool. "May we inquire to whom we have the honor of speaking? My name is of no account, but you must aid me. You, sir," he turned to Holmes. "I know your face. You are Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street." Holmes inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging not so much the fact as the inevitability of recognition. "If you know my name," said he, "then you also know that I do not extend my services lightly, particularly when imposed upon without introduction." The man leaned across the table, his eyes burning. "If you do not aid me, there will be death this very night." At this, Holmes' expression altered scarcely at all, save that his pipe ceased its orbit between fingers and lips. "Then I suppose, Watson," said he quietly, "our holiday is at an end." The man, who at last gave his name as Etienne Roux, spoke in halting but impassioned tones. He was a schoolmaster of the island, or had been until recent events forced him into hiding. There was talk of a curse, of strange disappearances among the fishermen, of a figure glimpsed by moonlight upon the cliffs. Most ominously, there was the case of Pierre Lemarchand, whose body had been found in the churchyard, though his grave had been sealed these 10 years past. As Roux spoke, the tavern's patrons leaned in closer, their eyes fixed on Holmes, who listened with an absorption that to the untrained eye might have seemed indifference. Only I, accustomed to his methods, recognized the faint tightening at the corners of his mouth, which meant that the game, for him, was already afoot. When Roux had finished, Holmes rose. "You have done wisely to approach me," said he, "but before I can act, I must see with my own eyes. Watson, finish your ale. We have work before us." And thus, upon that desolate island where we had expected nothing more than a day's idle wandering, we found ourselves drawn into a mystery which would tax the limits of Holmes's powers and lead us into perilous depths I scarce dared to anticipate. The silence that followed Roux's dire pronouncement was broken only by the low murmur of the sea through the open shutters. A log in the tavern hearth shifted with a crack, sending a spray of sparks up the chimney. The fishermen, who had at first pretended indifference, now leaned closer, their rough faces creased with apprehension. Holmes, ever the master of precision, fixed Roux with his piercing gaze. "Mr. Roux," said he, "if I am to involve myself, it must be upon fact, not fear. Your words are veined with superstition. Let us strip them of embellishment. Begin again. Who precisely has died, when, and under what circumstances?" Roux's hands trembled as he gripped the table's edge. "Pierre Lemarchand, monsieur. 10 years in his grave, buried with rites, as the priest will attest. Yet 2 nights ago he was seen walking near the chapel. Last night his body was found upon the very stones of the churchyard, twisted as though flung from a height. His grave remains sealed." Holmes's lips curved almost imperceptibly. "A man dead 10 years walks again? You perceive, Watson, the difficulty we confront, whether we investigate a crime or a legend." "Surely, Holmes," I interjected, "the latter is out of the question." "Precisely why it intrigues me." A fisherman at the next table leaned over, his Breton accent thick as he addressed us. "Pierre, by the cliffs." He looked as though the sea had claimed him and cast him back. The man crossed himself, and several others followed suit. Holmes turned upon him. "Your name?" "Alain Kerjean." "Mr. Kerjean, were you not in the tavern when we arrived? Your boots, wet with brine above the ankle. You had walked the strand not long since. Why, then, did you not speak of this marvel sooner?" The man blanched. "Because, monsieur, those who speak too freely of the dead upon this island do not live long themselves." A ripple of unease ran through the room. The broad-shouldered woman behind the counter muttered something in Breton and ostentatiously busied herself with the tankards. Holmes leaned back in his chair, his steepled fingers before his lips. "Remarkable," he murmured. "Fear more palpable than the smoke of this room. Yet fear, Watson, is the ally of deception. It blinds men to simple truths." Roux reached across the table, grasping Holmes's sleeve. "You do not believe me, yet I swear it. Pierre Lemarchand is not the only one. Others have vanished these past months. Fishermen gone to sea and not returned. Nets found slashed, livestock bled as if by invisible teeth. The island is cursed." "Cursed," Holmes repeated, his brows lifting. "No, my good fellow, but assuredly it is plagued, whether by men or by natural circumstance remains to be seen. Tell me of this grave. Who confirmed that it remains sealed?" "The priest, Father Anselme. He has locked the chapel since. Then we must call upon Father Anselme without delay." Holmes rose abruptly. "Watson, bring your medical bag. If we are to be embroiled in exhumations and untimely corpses, your skills may prove indispensable." I protested mildly, for the ale was but half finished, but Holmes was already striding toward the door, his long coat flaring behind him. Rue hurried after, throwing nervous glances over his shoulder, as though some invisible pursuer shadowed his steps. The village lay somber beneath a lowering sky. Narrow lanes wound between cottages, whose shutters were barred, though the hour was not late. Children peered from doorways, only to be drawn hastily inside by unseen hands. The only sound was the dull roar of the surf and the distant cry of gulls wheeling above the cliffs. Holmes strode with his usual rapid gait, his eyes darting over details, the pattern of cartwheels in the mud, the broken shutter of a house, the faint smear of pitch upon a doorstep. To me they were trifles, but to him they formed a silent testimony. "Note, Watson," said he, halting to point with his stick. "Here a footprint, narrow, high-arched, clearly not of a fisherman accustomed to broad, splayed soles. Our mysterious visitor of the tavern, Rue, perhaps?" "But we walked together," I objected. "Precisely, and yet these prints are older. Rue has paced this path before. A man agitated, restless, observed the double impression at each step." We reached the chapel, a weathered structure of gray stone perched upon a rise overlooking the sea. Its doors were bolted, the windows shuttered. A figure in black, stooped with age, emerged from a side cottage at our knock. This was Father Anselm, his face lined like the bark of an ancient oak, his eyes sunken yet sharp. "You seek to disturb the dead," he said without greeting. Holmes inclined his head gravely. "We seek only truth, Father, a truth which I fear may be obscured by shadows of fear and fable. We would see the grave of Pierre Lemarchand." The priest's lips tightened. "Better you leave this island, monsieur. The sea will take its due, and man can do nothing." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "man can do much, especially when the sea is but a convenient mask for human agency. You will grant us entry, Father, or must we appeal to the captain of the Cynthia for authority?" For a moment it seemed the priest would refuse. Then, with a sigh that was almost a groan, he drew a heavy key from his robe and led us within. The chapel was dim, lit only by the light that filtered through cracks in the shutters. Dust motes hung in the air like phantoms. In the chancel lay a bier, upon which was stretched the body of a man. I confess I started. "Good heavens, is this Lemarchand?" Father Anselm nodded. "Found at dawn in the churchyard." Holmes advanced, his movements precise, and bent over the corpse. "Watson, your observations, if you please." I approached reluctantly. The body was indeed that of a man perhaps in his 40s, though the features were bloated, the skin pallid with a faint greenish cast. His clothing was tattered, the boots worn, the hands calloused as of a laborer. Yet what struck me most was the salt crust along the hair and beard, and the faint odor of brine. "He has lain in the sea," I said. "The body shows signs of immersion, yet rigor is incomplete. Death occurred perhaps 12 hours ago." "Excellent," said Holmes. He pointed to the man's wrist. "Note the rope mark, recent and raw. He was bound before death, then consigned to the water. Not the resurrection of a corpse, but the murder of a living man." "But if this is Pierre Lemarchand," I protested, "he has been dead 10 years. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "So the records state, yet here he lies, fresh to death. How do you explain it, Watson?" I was at a loss. Holmes straightened. "That, my dear fellow, is the crux. Either this is not Lemarchand, or he never died when it was believed he did. In either case, deception reigns." Father Anselm made the sign of the cross. "You meddle with powers you do not understand." Holmes's smile was thin. "On the contrary, Father, it is the powers of men I seek to understand, and they are ever more dangerous than those of heaven or hell." We emerged from the chapel into gathering dusk. The sea was a sheet of dull pewter, the horizon swallowed by mist. Rue clutched at Holmes's arm. "You see now, monsieur. Will you help us?" Holmes looked out toward the darkening cliffs. "Help you, yes. But it is not spirits we face, Rue. It is flesh and blood. Tonight, Watson, we shall keep vigil upon the cliffs. There lies the heart of this mystery." At that, Holmes fell silent, his face turned toward the brooding sea, as though in its restless surface he read the cipher of the night to come. The night descended swiftly upon Mortemont, as though the very heavens conspired to smother the place in gloom. A damp wind rose from the west, carrying with it the brine of the sea and the faint tang of seaweed drying on the strand. The cottages of the villagers fell dark one by one, their shutters barred as though against some invisible menace. By the time we reached the cliff path, the island was as silent as a tomb. Holmes walked at a rapid pace, his dark silhouette sharp against the fading twilight. Rue trailed behind us, muttering half prayers, half curses in his native tongue. I carried my medical satchel, though I suspected it would serve less in healing than in bearing witness to whatever horrors the night might bring. The cliffs themselves rose sheer, jagged escarpments of basalt plunging into the white froth of waves far below. The moon, thin and wan, hung above the horizon, casting a sickly silver sheen over the restless waters. To our right, the path widened into a natural ledge, half sheltered by a spur of rock. Holmes chose this place for our vigil. "Here, Watson," he whispered, seating himself with deliberate care. "Observe the line of sight. From this vantage, one commands both the chapel and the strand below, an ideal position for, shall we say, certain activities under cover of night." "You suspect we shall see something tonight?" I asked, lowering my voice instinctively. "My dear fellow, I rely upon it. The pattern of these events, vanishings, appearances, and last night's grim discovery points to repetition. The perpetrator acts under necessity, not whim. Therefore he must act again. Smile, and if he does not, gleamed in the moonlight. Then we shall have wasted a night, which is more than London ever allowed me." Rue shivered violently, wrapping his coat tighter. "Monsieur Holmes, you do not understand. There are things upon this island that walk by night which are not men." Holmes regarded him with cold amusement. "Nonsense, Rue. Even the devil himself, were he to walk abroad, would leave footprints, and those, I assure you, I can follow." So we waited. The hours dragged with a heaviness only those who have kept vigil in desolate places may comprehend. The wind sighed through the grasses, gulls cried eerily from their hidden roosts, and the boom of waves below seemed to count out the slow measure of time. Once about midnight, I started violently at a sound behind us. Holmes laid a hand upon my arm. "A hare, Watson. Note the rhythm of the rustle, 4-footed, not 2. You must learn to distinguish." Despite his calm, I fancied more than once that a figure flitted upon the cliff edge, half seen in the mist, but each time it resolved itself into shadow, or the twisting of the wind through scrub and stone. At length, Holmes, who had been peering steadily toward the chapel, made a low exclamation. "There, Watson. Do you see?" I followed his gaze. The chapel stood dark and silent, its cross etched faintly against the stars. Yet in the churchyard before it moved a shape, tall, stooping, unmistakably human. It glided between the gravestones with an ungainly slowness, pausing now and again as if in search of something buried there. Rue choked back a cry. "It is him! It is Lemarchand returned!" Holmes's hand clamped upon his arm. "Silence, man, unless you wish to frighten off our quarry. That is no ghost." I strained my eyes. The figure bent low, then straightened, its face catching the moonlight for a fleeting instant. It was ghastly pale, the features sunken, yet there was nothing spectral in its movements. It was flesh, exceedingly mortal flesh. Holmes whispered, "Note the gait, uneven, as of one leg shortened, and the shoulders too broad for a fisherman, more like a man accustomed to burden. Fascinating! Come, Watson, we shall intercept him." Before I could protest, Holmes had risen and was moving silently along the path, keeping low against the rocks. Rue followed reluctantly, his breath rasping like a saw. I hurried after them, my heart thudding in my chest. We descended by a narrow track that led toward the churchyard gate. The figure still moved among the graves, its back turned. Holmes motioned us to halt, then stepped forward, his voice ringing clear and cold in the night. "Pierre Lemarchand, or whoever you are, stand where you are." The figure froze. For a moment it seemed about to obey. Then, with startling swiftness, it bounded toward the wall, vaulted it with a strength that belied its shambling gait, and fled toward the cliffs. "After him, Watson!" Holmes cried. We gave chase, stumbling over loose stones, the salt wind lashing our faces. The fugitive ran with desperate speed, though his uneven stride betrayed him. We gained upon him as he neared the cliff's edge. Suddenly he wheeled, raising something gleaming in his hand, a knife. Rue shrieked and fell back. I saw the moonlight flash upon steel. But Holmes was quicker. With a sweep of his stick, he struck the weapon from the man's grasp. It clattered upon the rocks. For an instant we had him cornered. His face, contorted with rage and fear, was that of a stranger to me, gaunt, with hollow eyes that burned unnaturally bright. He uttered a guttural cry in a tongue I did not recognize, then hurled himself backward over the brink. I rushed forward, horror-stricken, but Holmes seized my arm. Too late, Watson. The sea claims him now. We peered down into the churning darkness. There was no sign, only the crash of waves against stone. The man had vanished utterly. Roux fell to his knees, crossing himself repeatedly. You see, monsieur, he was no man. No man could fall so and not be dashed to pieces. Holmes stooped, retrieving the fallen knife. He turned it in his hand, his eyes alight with grim satisfaction. On the contrary, Roux, this is proof most certain that he was a man. A spectre has no need of steel. He slipped the blade into his pocket and straightened. Come, Watson, the game is well begun. We have seen our phantom, and I warrant he will not remain in the sea forever. There are mysteries yet deeper than this tide can conceal. The wind rose, carrying with it the roar of the waves and the wail of distant gulls. As we turned back toward the village, a chill passed through me that was not born of the night air. Whatever truth lay behind the strange events of Mortemont, it was clear that Holmes and I had crossed the threshold into a drama of darkness and peril. Thus began our adventure upon the island, a holiday turned swiftly to horror, and the first step into a labyrinth whose end I could not yet foresee. Chapter 2. The Knife in the Morning Light. I rose early the next morning, my rest broken and my dreams haunted by the pale, desperate visage of the man who had cast himself from the cliffs. The room allotted to me at the tavern was narrow, with low beams and a single small window through which the gray dawn crept reluctantly. The sea could be heard even here, a low mutter as if the island itself whispered in its sleep. Holmes was already awake, seated by the window, the pale light falling across his sharp features. Before him on the table lay the knife we had recovered the night before, its blade still flecked with sea salt. He was examining it with his lens, his long fingers moving delicately over hilt and edge. "Good morning, Watson," said he without looking up. "You see before you not a relic of legend, but a most serviceable tool of flesh and blood. Observe." I leaned over his shoulder. The knife was long, narrow, and wickedly pointed, more stiletto than sailor's blade. The hilt was wrapped in cord, frayed in places, but the metal showed workmanship of unusual fineness. "It is continental," Holmes continued, "not English nor of island make. Spanish, I believe. Note the temper of the steel and the style of the guard. More particularly, observe here, faint discoloration upon the hilt, as from tar. Our man has handled nets or cordage. A seaman then, but not one of these Breton fishermen. They use knives broader of blade. This, my dear fellow, was fashioned for piercing between ribs." "A weapon of murder," I said grimly. "Precisely, and a murder weapon is seldom carried without intent." He laid the knife aside and steepled his fingers. "Consider, Watson. A man believed dead these 10 years appears upon the island. He is discovered to be alive, only to perish again, this time most certainly. Why should such a fiction be maintained? What purpose is served by making the islanders believe in a resurrection?" "To inspire terror, perhaps," I suggested. Roux and the others seemed convinced of supernatural agency. Holmes nodded approvingly. "Fear is the most efficient instrument of control. An island steeped in superstition may be led by the nose, provided the hand that leads remains unseen. The question becomes, whose hand?" Before I could reply, there came a knock at our door. Roux entered, pale and anxious. "Monsieur, you must come. The village stirs with talk of last night. Already they say the devil himself walks among us." Holmes rose briskly, slipping the knife into his pocket. "Excellent. Let us hear what form the devil takes at breakfast." The tavern's common room was crowded when we descended. Fishermen clustered in groups, their voices raised in fearful argument. The landlady, stern as ever, moved among them with steaming jugs, while her sharp eyes missed nothing. As we entered, all talk ceased. Alain Kerjean, the fisherman who had spoken to us the night before, pushed forward. "Did you not
You were
confront
seen
the
near the
walking chapel,
dead?"
monsieur?" Holmes surveyed the circle of faces with cool detachment. "We confronted a man, not a ghost. He fled as any man might and flung himself into the sea. You may be assured that what walks your island does so on mortal legs." A murmur swept the room, half relief, half doubt. An older man with a weathered face and thick gray beard stepped forward. His manner bore authority. I later learned he was Yves Tregenec, the village syndic, or magistrate. "Monsieur Holmes, he said gravely. You speak boldly. Yet many here saw with their own eyes the face of Pierre Lemarchand, dead and buried these 10 years. Holmes's gaze sharpened. So you believe. Tell me, Monsieur Tregenec, what manner of man was Lemarchand in life? The syndic hesitated. He was a strong man, a fisherman, skilled but quick to quarrel. Some said he smuggled, others that he trafficked with the mainland in things best left unnamed. Yet when his boat was found wrecked, we buried him with prayers as was fitting. Holmes inclined his head. And where lies his widow? A silence fell, broken only by the shifting of boots. Finally the landlady spoke, her voice like flint striking steel. Jean Lemarchand left the island soon after his death. She lives now at Roscoff, across the water. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Indeed, a widow who may not be a widow. That, Watson, is a thread worth following. The syndic frowned. Monsieur Holmes, I must insist you tread carefully. These are simple folk. If you unsettle them with tales of conspiracies and living corpses, you will bring ruin. On the contrary, monsieur, Holmes replied, his voice suddenly hard. It is deceit which breeds ruin, and truth alone that can dispel it. Your island harbors secrets more dangerous than superstition. I intend to uncover them. The syndic's eyes narrowed, but he said no more. Later that morning, Holmes led me along the strand beneath the cliffs. The tide was low, revealing a scatter of black rocks and tide pools. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries harsh in the wind. Holmes walked with his gaze fixed upon the ground, scanning each stone with relentless attention. At length he stooped, plucking something from a crevice between rocks. Behold, Watson, hemp fibers, coarse, tarred, a fragment of rope, frayed as if cut by a blade. Our fugitive reached the shore, bound still, when he entered the water. These strands tell us he freed himself upon the rocks before ascending the cliffs. Then he did not perish in the sea after all? I exclaimed. Holmes slipped the fibers into his pocket. No, Watson, the man lives, and he will attempt to strike again. We must anticipate his purpose. Why return after so many years? What draws him to Mortemont? As we climbed back toward the village, I pondered his words with unease. All around us, the island seemed heavy with silence, as though it too concealed a secret it dared not speak. That evening, as the tavern lamps were lit, a messenger arrived from the syndic, summoning Holmes to a council at the rectory. Rue was white with dread. You must not go, monsieur. They will turn against you. The syndic, the priest, they do not wish these matters stirred. Holmes only smiled, that cold, eager smile I knew so well. On the contrary, Rue, it is precisely when men seek to bury a truth that one must dig deepest. Watson, fetch your coat. Tonight, we confront the rulers of Mortemont. And thus the stage was set for the first of many confrontations upon that strange island, where the shadows of the past lay long, and the truth hid behind faces as weather-worn as the cliffs themselves. The rectory stood on the slope above the chapel, a stern stone dwelling with narrow windows like watchful eyes. A lantern burned above the doorway, its yellow glow casting a wavering circle upon the flagstones. We approached in silence, Rue lagging behind as though compelled forward against his will. Inside, the air was heavy with the mingled scent of wax and old wood. A long table stood in the center, lit by a brace of candles. Around it sat 3 men, Yves Tregenec, the syndic, Father Anselme, his hands folded on his breast, and a younger man in the dark coat of a solicitor, whom I later learned to be Jacques Morvan, secretary to the syndic. All eyes turned upon us as we entered. Holmes bowed slightly, his face calm, his eyes bright with that inward fire I had seen in many an inquiry. Monsieur Holmes, said Tregenec with measured courtesy, we have asked you here to clarify certain matters. The village is restless. They say you chased a phantom from the churchyard last night. Holmes drew out the knife and laid it upon the table, the steel flashing in the candlelight. A phantom, monsieur? Ghosts do not carry Spanish stilettos nor seek to stab their pursuers. The man I confronted was flesh and blood. A stir passed around the table. Father Anselme's lips tightened, while Morvan leaned forward eagerly. You saw his face? The solicitor pressed. I saw enough to know this much. If it was Lemarchand, then his death 10 years ago was a fiction. The priest's voice rang sharp. Blasphemy! He was buried in consecrated ground. I myself said the mass. Then the man in that grave was not Pierre Lemarchand, Holmes replied coolly, or else the man I saw was another entirely. Which possibility strikes you as more troubling, Father? A silence followed, broken only by the hiss of the candles. The syndic drummed his fingers upon the table. "Monsieur Holmes," he said at last, "your words sow doubt among people already fearful. I must ask, what is it to you? You came to this island by chance. Why entangle yourself in affairs that do not concern you?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Because falsehood, monsieur, concerns me always. It corrodes the soul of a place more surely than any plague. Already men have died. More will follow unless the truth is brought to light." Morvan spoke again, his voice low but intense. "Perhaps, monsieur, you have guessed too much already. Some here may wish these questions buried." Holmes leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness. "I have found, Monsieur Morvan, that truth buried has a most persistent habit of clawing its way back to the surface. One may as well forbid the tide." The syndic rose abruptly. "Enough. You may do as you will, Monsieur Holmes, but remember, you are guests here, nothing more. If trouble follows, it is upon your head." With that, the meeting dissolved. Father Anselme turned away, muttering a prayer. Morvan lingered, his dark eyes fixed upon Holmes with an expression I could not read. Then he too departed. Outside, the wind had risen, moaning among the eaves of the chapel. Rue clutched my sleeve as we descended the path. "You see, doctor, they do not want you here. They will make you leave, or worse." Holmes halted suddenly, his head tilted. "Hush, Rue, we are followed." I turned, my heart leaping. Indeed, in the shifting gloom beyond the chapel wall, I glimpsed movement, a figure slipping from shadow to shadow. Holmes stepped swiftly toward it, but the figure melted into the darkness with surprising swiftness. Only the scrape of a loose stone and the echo of hurried steps betrayed its retreat. Holmes returned, his face grim with satisfaction. "Excellent. We have an enemy, Watson. That confirms we are upon the right path." "Do you not recognize the danger, Holmes?" I exclaimed. "This island is no friendly ground. The syndic resents us, the priest denounces us, and some unknown hand tracks our every movement." "Precisely so," said he, his eyes glittering. "What better conditions could one ask for? Come, Watson. The truth of Mortemont lies close. I can smell it in the very wind." That night, as we retired once more to our rooms above the tavern, I could not shake a sense of foreboding. The sea boomed like a giant's heartbeat against the cliffs, and the rafters creaked as though burdened by dreams of pale faces and knives gleaming in the moonlight. When I awoke in the small hours, I found Holmes seated once more by the window, the knife upon the sill before him. His profile was etched in shadow, his eyes fixed upon the restless sea beyond. "Holmes," I whispered, "you have not slept." He did not turn. "No, Watson, for sleep is the enemy of vigilance, and tonight the island whispers louder than ever. There is a hand guiding these events, and before long it will show itself." He turned at last, and the candlelight caught the sharp planes of his face. "Mark me, Watson, this island is a stage, and the players are gathering. We have seen but the first act. The true drama is yet to come." Chapter 3. The Grave and the Sea. I have seldom seen Sherlock Holmes more invigorated than upon the morning following our unsettling encounter at the rectory. Whereas I, with nerves worn by sleeplessness, felt the weight of the night heavy upon me, Holmes greeted the day as a man might a long-awaited adversary. His eyes were bright, his step purposeful, and his every movement conveyed that inward tension which I knew always preceded the unspooling of some intricate skein of deduction. "Watson," said he, while we breakfasted on coarse bread and fish at the tavern, "last night confirmed what I suspected. Mortemont is a stage, and the villagers mere audience. The syndic, the priest, the solicitor, each conceals more than he has spoken. Our task is not to separate truth from falsehood, but falsehood from the particular lies of each man." I sighed, stirring my coffee, which was of a bitterness to rival his strongest tobacco. "And where do you propose we begin?" "With the grave," he replied briskly. "The dead, Watson, are eloquent when one learns how to listen. We shall visit Pierre Lemarchand's resting place in the daylight. A grave sealed for 10 years should yield at least some trace of its supposed occupant." Rue, who hovered near our table, turned pale at this pronouncement. "Monsieur, you cannot disturb the grave. The villagers will never permit it. Father Anselme will curse." Holmes cut him off with a flick of the hand. "Nonsense. The grave will tell us more in 10 minutes than your priest in 100 sermons. Come, Watson, bring your stoutest boots and your calmest nerves." The chapel yard was deserted when we arrived, save for the solitary caw of a crow perched upon the leaning cross. The air smelled faintly of sea spray, for the cliffs were but a stone's throw distant, and the morning mist still clung to the grass like a shroud. Holmes strode directly to the grave marked by a weather-worn slab. The inscription, half effaced by time, bore the name Pierre Lemarchand, 1849 to 1882. Moss crept along the edges of the letters like fingers of decay. Holmes examined the stone intently, crouching to peer at the soil. He traced the outline of the mound with his stick, then suddenly thrust it into the earth. The ground yielded easily, softer than it should have been. "Ha!" he exclaimed. "You see, Watson, the grave has been tampered with. The soil is loose, recently disturbed, though artfully covered. Someone has opened this resting place within the past fortnight." My heart gave a leap. "Then it is true? The body was removed," Holmes finished. "Whether recently or long ago, we shall determine. Give me your hand." Together we pried aside the stone slab with the aid of Holmes's walking stick and my pocket knife. Beneath, to my horror, lay not a coffin intact, but fragments of rotten wood, splintered and torn as though forced open. The cavity was shallow, scarcely 2 feet deep, and contained only a scattering of bones, animal bones, I realized with a shudder. Holmes's face grew grim. As I thought, Lemarchand's grave was a decoy. The villagers buried a box of refuse to quiet suspicion, while the man himself was elsewhere. Either he never died at all, or his corpse was removed immediately to conceal some crime. But to what purpose? I asked, appalled. To cloak a deception which has lasted a decade and now reawakens to menace the island. But note, Watson, the bones are of goat or sheep, chosen to mimic human form at a glance. Crude work. Whoever contrived this had no fear of future scrutiny. Why? Because he trusted that superstition would prevent any curious hand from probing further. He straightened, his eyes alight. Ah, Watson, how easily fear enslaves men. 10 years of silence, and only now does the lie crumble. We replaced the stone hastily, for the sound of voices drifted from the lane beyond. Holmes motioned me aside, and we concealed ourselves behind the chapel wall. Presently 2 villagers appeared, bearing baskets of fish. Their conversation in low repertoire was unintelligible to me, but Holmes's ear caught enough. "They speak of us," he whispered. "The Englishmen who pry too deeply. Already our presence stirs the island like a stick in a hornet's nest." The men passed without seeing us, and Holmes emerged, brushing dust from his coat. "Good. Let them talk. Talk is the surest means of flushing out the truth." We had scarce returned to the tavern when a commotion broke out upon the strand. A crowd of villagers had gathered, their cries carrying through the salt wind. Holmes quickened his pace, and we forced our way through the throng to the water's edge. There, upon the shingle, lay a body. It had been cast up by the tide, the clothing sodden and torn, the hair matted with seaweed. I knelt beside it at once, professional instinct overcoming revulsion. "Another fisherman," I said, "middle-aged, powerfully built. Death by drowning, but see here, Holmes." I indicated a dark bruise upon the temple. A blow preceded his immersion. Holmes crouched, his eyes glittering. "Excellent, Watson. And observe, the wrists show rope marks, precisely as with the supposed Lemarchand of last night. The pattern repeats. This is no accident of the sea. It is systematic." The syndic pushed forward through the crowd, his face ashen. "Jean Kervadec," he muttered, "gone these 3 days. We thought his boat lost in the storm." Holmes rose, fixing the man with a penetrating gaze. "Lost? No, monsieur. Murdered. And not by the sea, but by human hands. You may tell your people that the devil who stalks Mortemont is not of the other world, but very much of this one." The villagers murmured in fear, some crossing themselves, others casting suspicious glances at their neighbors. Tregenec raised his hand for silence. "Enough, Monsieur Holmes. This is for the council to judge." Holmes's voice rang sharp. "Judge, yes, but by what standard? Shall you bury this man too with goat bones in his stead, as you did Lemarchand?" A gasp rose from the crowd. The syndic flushed darkly, but made no reply. Holmes turned abruptly and strode back toward the tavern, leaving a wake of stunned silence. In the privacy of our chamber, he paced furiously, his long fingers twitching. "We're close, Watson, close. 2 men bound and cast into the sea, one dead, one feigning resurrection. Why? To what end? Smuggling, perhaps, or some darker commerce. The syndic is complicit, I am sure of it, And the priest, his silence condemns him more than words. He halted suddenly. But there is a hand above them both, a guiding intelligence. The man upon the cliffs, gaunt, desperate, he is a pawn, not the master. The true enemy remains hidden. We must bring him to light. How, Holmes? I asked. By drawing him out. Tonight, Watson, we return to the cliffs, but this time we do not watch. We bait the snare. He turned to the window, where the sea stretched dark and endless beneath the gathering dusk. Mark me, Watson, Mortemont is a stage, and tonight the curtain shall rise upon the second act. The day lengthened into a gray afternoon, the sky overcast and heavy, shifting from one window to another of our modest chamber, pausing to glance down at the strand where the body of John Kervadec had been borne away for hurried burial. His cigarette smoked forgotten between his fingers, while his thoughts spun faster than his words. At last he spoke. We are observed, Watson. You noted the man last night who shadowed us? He is not alone. Already I have counted 3 unfamiliar faces in the tavern below. Fishermen, by all appearance, but with the hands of men accustomed to knife and rope rather than net and oar. I had indeed remarked those same figures, their eyes sliding toward us when they thought themselves unperceived. What purpose could they have in following us so openly? Holmes smiled thinly. Because they wish to intimidate, not conceal. It is the way of a pack to circle the prey before striking. But intimidation works poorly upon me, Watson. This evening we shall invert the roles. He leaned closer, his voice lowering. The cliffs are the stage. Lemarchand, or the man who claims to be he, used them for his entry. The sea gives and it takes, hiding all manner of secrets. We must discover whether there lies some landing place, some hidden cove, which explains these curious resurrections. Tonight we walk the cliff paths, not as watchers, but as bait. The rain began at twilight, a fine mist that thickened as we ascended the path above the village. Rue had begged us not to go, muttering of curses and drowned spirits, but Holmes silenced him with a look. If I am correct, Rue, your drowned spirits are nothing more than smugglers and murderers. Pray for our safety, if you will, but keep your tongue from wagging. The fewer who know of our errand, the better. The path wound sharply upward, slick with moss and shale. Below, the sea roared against the rocks, sending up bursts of spray that reached us even at that height. Holmes moved with his usual sure-footedness, his cloak whipping about him like a dark banner. I followed close behind, my revolver heavy in my pocket. Holmes, I called above the wind, what if they are armed, as likely they are? Then your revolver may earn its keep, he replied lightly. But fear not, Watson. Men who deal in shadows seldom crave open battle. They thrive upon fear and secrecy. Deprived of these, they falter. We reached a ledge where the path widened, affording a clear view of the restless sea below. Holmes halted, crouching low. Here, Watson. This shall serve. We wait, and we see what bait draws our quarry forth. An hour passed, the rain soaking through my coat, the chill numbing my fingers. I began to doubt Holmes's stratagem when a sound reached us, faint at first, then unmistakable. The dip of oars, steady and purposeful, carrying over the surf. Holmes touched my arm, his eyes gleaming. There! Do you hear? A boat approaches. Keep low. I peered into the gloom. Sure enough, a small craft moved across the water, its outline barely discernible in the mist. It nosed toward the base of the cliffs, where a narrow fissure yawned like the mouth of a cave. A lantern flashed briefly, once, twice. Some signal. Holmes's hand gripped my sleeve with sudden intensity. Observe, Watson. A hidden landing. Our stage has revealed its trapdoor. 2 figures emerged from the shadows of the fissure, hauling ropes. The boat was drawn in, swallowed by the cliff's embrace. Then all was silent once more, save the eternal pounding of the surf. Holmes exhaled softly, like a man who has received confirmation of his deepest suspicion. Smugglers, Watson. Yes, but not mere smugglers. Mark how secret, how elaborate. A hidden cove, known only to those sworn to silence. There lies the true artery of Mortemont's mystery. But who commands them? I asked. The syndic? The priest? This Lemarchand? Holmes's gaze remained fixed upon the darkness. That is the riddle. Lemarchand may be their puppet, or their master. Tonight we have seen only the mechanism. Tomorrow we must seize the hand that turns the wheel. We lingered longer, hoping for further movement, but none came. At last Holmes rose. Enough for tonight. We risk discovery if we remain. Come, Watson. Our quarry knows not that we have glimpsed his secret, and in that ignorance lies our advantage. We descended the path cautiously, the rain now a steady sheet. The village lay dark and silent, save for the dull gleam of lanterns in the tavern. Yet as we neared the door, I felt that unmistakable sensation of eyes upon us. Holmes halted suddenly, his nostrils flaring. "You sense it too, Watson? We are followed again." Before I could reply, a figure detached itself from the shadows. It was Jacques Mortemont, the syndic's secretary. His cloak clung to him with rain, and his expression was one of strained urgency. "Messieurs," he whispered hoarsely, "you are in grave peril. They watch you every step. Come, speak with me in private. There are things I must tell you, but not here." Holmes regarded him coolly, his eyes unreadable. "And why, monsieur, should we trust the word of a man who last night warned us against meddling?" Morvant's hand trembled as he gestured toward the cliffs. "Because I, too, am trapped in their web. I sought to serve the syndic, but now I see the depth of their evil. Meet me tomorrow at dawn by the ruined watchtower on the eastern headland. There I will speak freely." Without waiting for reply, he melted back into the darkness, leaving us with the echo of his words. Holmes's lips curved in a rare smile. "Excellent, Watson. The play grows lively. Tomorrow promises revelations. But beware. When a man promises truth in secret, it is oft because death waits in the open." We entered the tavern in silence, dripping with rain. The fire hissed as we approached it, Rue hovering anxiously. Holmes lowered himself into a chair, drew out the Spanish stiletto, and set it on the table before him. "There lies the key," he murmured. "Steel forged across the sea, carried to this lonely isle, wielded in darkness. Tonight we have glimpsed its shadow. Tomorrow we shall trace the hand that wields it." And with that, he fell silent, his eyes fixed on the flames, while I felt the weight of the sea and the storm press upon my soul. Chapter 4. The Watchtower at Dawn. The storm of the previous evening had blown itself out by morning, leaving the island washed clean, as though the sea itself had sought to erase the deeds of men. A pale sun glimmered uncertainly through the ragged clouds, casting shafts of silver light upon the restless water. Holmes was already at the window when I roused myself, his silhouette sharp against the wan glow. "Up, Watson," said he briskly. "Our appointment awaits. Morvan is not the sort to endure delay. If he speaks true, we shall hear things today that will strip Mortemont bare of its mysteries." I dressed swiftly, though not without a certain heaviness of spirit. The memory of the hidden cove, the boat swallowed by the cliffs, and the ominous words of Morvan weighed heavily upon me. Holmes, by contrast, exuded a restless energy, his every movement purposeful. We took a hasty breakfast in the tavern. Rue, ever watchful, tried to draw us into conversation, but Holmes cut him off with a curt shake of the head. "Not this morning. Guard your tongue, boy. The less you know of our business, the longer you may keep your skin intact." Rue paled but said no more, and we set off along the eastern path. The route to the watchtower was a lonely one, skirting the headland where the cliffs fell sheer into the boiling surf. The structure itself came into view as we rounded a bend, a crumbling edifice of stone, squat and square, its roof half collapsed, its windows gaping like empty sockets. It had once, no doubt, been a sentinel against invaders, but now it was little more than a ruin haunted by gulls. Holmes studied it keenly. Out of sight of village and chapel, place for secrets, and with the sea at its back. If Morvan intended treachery, one could hardly conceive a better stage. "You still suspect him?" I asked. Holmes gave a thin smile. "I suspect all men equally, until I have reason not to. Remember that, Watson. Suspicion is not accusation, but merely the habit of a cautious mind." We entered the watchtower cautiously. The interior smelled of damp and salt, the floor strewn with fragments of stone and tufts of grass. A spiral stair clung precariously to the wall, leading upward to what remained of the battlements. At first glance, the place seemed deserted. But then a figure stirred in the shadows. Jacques Morvan himself, his cloak drawn tightly about him. His face was pale and drawn, as though he had not slept. "You came," he said quickly. "Good. I feared you might mistrust me." "An understandable fear," Holmes replied coolly. "Now, monsieur, speak. What is this evil that ensnares Mortemont?" Morvan cast a glance toward the broken doorway, as though fearful of eavesdroppers. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice to a hoarse whisper. "It began 10 years ago. with the death, or supposed death, of Pierre Lemarchand. He was no ordinary fisherman, as the villagers believe. He was a smuggler, a black trader who trafficked with men from Spain and the Channel coast. His death was staged, his grave a sham. The syndic knew it, as did Father Anselm. They conspired to declare him dead to quiet suspicion. Why? Holmes interjected. Because Lemarchand had become useful to them. His cove, his secret routes, they were too valuable to lose. And so, under cover of his resurrection, they continued their commerce. For years, the trade has flourished. Weapons, brandy, contraband of every sort. The villagers fear the curse, and so they ask no questions. But those who oppose... He broke off, swallowing hard. You saw Kervadec upon the strand. He defied them. That was his fate. I felt a chill despite the morning sun. And you, monsieur, why confide in us now? Morvon's eyes darted nervously. Because I too have grown weary of the charade. I serve the syndic, yes, but I am no murderer. Last night, when you exposed the grave, you struck a blow I lacked the courage to attempt. If the truth is revealed, the power of the council crumbles. But, his voice faltered, they will not allow it. They watch you. They plan against you even now. Holmes's gaze sharpened. And who is the true master of this enterprise? Tregenec, Anselm, or Lemarchand himself? Morvon hesitated, his lips trembling as though the name itself were perilous to utter. At last he whispered, Lemarchand lives. He rules from the shadows. Tregenec bends to him. The priest excuses him. The men of the cove obey him. He is the hand, the brain, the devil of Mortemont. Holmes's eyes glittered with satisfaction. Ah, then last night I faced not a phantom, but the master himself. Morven nodded quickly. Yes, and if he learns I have spoken to you. At that moment, a sound interrupted him, the crunch of gravel outside, the unmistakable tread of approaching feet. Morven's face blanched. Too late, they come. Holmes seized his arm. Quickly, Watson, the stair! We scrambled upward, Morven stumbling after us as shadows fell across the ruined doorway. A voice rang out below, harsh and commanding, one I did not recognize, yet carrying the weight of authority. Morvan, you are here. Speak, or you are a dead man. Holmes motioned for silence, crouched low upon the battlements, and drew me close. His whisper was a thread of sound. Patience, Watson. Let them declare themselves. Tonight we glimpse the devil himself. Below, the footsteps grew louder, nearer. A lantern flared, casting long fingers of light into the ruin. And then, the lantern below swung back and forth, its yellow beam crawling across the damp stones of the ruin like a probing finger. 3 men entered in silence. Their boots struck sharply against the scattered rubble, and one bore a length of chain coiled about his shoulder, another a cudgel thick as a man's wrist. The leader carried the lantern high, and by its glow I recognized him with a start. It was Yves Tregenec, the syndic. Morvan, he called, his voice a whip-crack against the silence. Step forward. We know you are here. You think to play informer, eh? You forget who made you. Come out before we drag you like a rat from its hole. Beside me, Morvan trembled violently. Holmes gripped his arm in warning. Not a word, he whispered. One careless sound and you are undone. The men spread out below, their lantern light flashing against the walls. Tregenec's gaze swept the ruin with the merciless patience of a hawk. His face was set, his mouth twisted in something between fury and contempt. They are here, he muttered to his companions. I smell it. Search the stair. One of the men moved toward the spiral stair. The old stones groaned under his weight. Step by step, the light crept upward, spilling against the crumbling wall until it threatened to reach us where we crouched upon the battlements. Holmes's hand slid into his coat. For an instant I thought he reached for his revolver. Instead, he withdrew a fragment of loose stone and let it fall deliberately. The pebble clattered loudly against the far side of the tower, skittering down the steps. Instantly, the lantern swung that way. There! Cried the man with the cudgel. He rushed toward the sound. The stair groaned under his weight, but in his eagerness he stumbled upon the uneven steps and fell heavily, cursing. Holmes seized the moment. With one swift motion, he drew Morvan to his feet and propelled him toward the far side of the battlements where a jagged breach gaped above the rocks. Quickly, Watson, he whispered. The sea will cover our escape. I glanced down in alarm. The cliff dropped sheer for 30 feet to a narrow ledge below, half slick with seaweed. The tide surged violently, spray leaping high. Holmes, it's suicide, I protested. Not at all. he retorted, already lowering himself. The ledge runs to the headland. A perilous road, yes, but safer than the syndic's justice. Go. There was no time for hesitation. Voices roared below as the searchers discovered our absence. With my heart hammering, I followed Holmes down the jagged wall, the stone wet beneath my fingers. Morvan came last, half shoved, half steadied by Holmes's iron grip. We dropped onto the ledge just as a lantern flared above. Tregonek's face appeared at the breach, eyes blazing. "Holmes!" he shouted, his voice carrying over the crash of the surf. "You meddling English devil! The sea shall have you yet!" Holmes only raised his hand in mocking salute, then turned along the ledge. We scrambled in single file, the spray soaking us with every wave. The path wound treacherously, at times no wider than a man's boot. Twice I nearly lost my footing, saved only by Holmes's steadying grasp. At length, panting and drenched, we reached a cleft where the ledge broadened. Holmes pressed us into the shadows just as shouts echoed from above. Lanterns bobbed along the cliff top, searching. "They cannot follow here," Holmes said coolly. "Too steep, too narrow. Their prey has slipped the net for tonight at least." We remained hidden until the voices receded. Morvan collapsed upon the rock, his face ashen. "You see," he gasped, "they would kill me without a thought, if you had not come." "Spare us the gratitude," Holmes interrupted. "Instead, answer me this. You named Lemarchand as the master. Why then does Tregonek command in his stead? Where is Lemarchand?" Morvan swallowed hard. "Lemarchand rarely shows himself. He rules from the shadows, through fear. I have seen him but once these past months. He has changed, older, gaunter, but his will is iron. He is the true master, and all obey him, even the priest." "Then we must flush him from his eyes glittered in the cove, Watson. The cave we saw last night. There lies the seat of his power, and tomorrow we shall visit it in daylight." By the time we regained the tavern, dawn had broken in earnest. Rue met us at the door, his eyes wide with terror at our soaked and ragged state. "You are mad, monsieur," he whispered. "The syndic will not rest until you are dead. Already the village says you consort with demons. Leave, before it is too late." Holmes shook the water from his coat with a careless laugh. "Leave, my boy? Why, the play grows more engaging with every act. No, Watson and I remain, and before long the island shall see its devil unmasked." He flung himself into a chair, his eyes blazing with that terrible vitality that comes upon him in the heart of danger. The Spanish stiletto lay upon the table before him once more, gleaming wickedly in the new light of morning. "Mark me, Watson," he said softly. "We stand upon the threshold. The grave was but a curtain, the drowned men but stage hands. The true drama begins now, and when it ends, the name of Pierre Lemarchand will be spoken in a very different tone." Chapter 5: The Hidden Cove. The morning dawned clear and crisp. The mist of the previous day burned away by the sun, leaving the island washed in a bracing clarity. Holmes rose with that indefatigable vigor of his, the air around him charged as if he could wrest secrets from the very stones. I, by contrast, felt the weight of exhaustion in my limbs, yet could not allow it to diminish my vigilance. The events of the past days had made Mortemont a place of shadow and suspicion, and I knew that a single misstep could prove fatal. Holmes, however, seemed to thrive on peril. After a brief breakfast of coarse bread and salted fish at the tavern, he consulted the map Morvan had drawn from memory. The parchment was worn, annotated in a trembling hand, showing a series of cliffs, coves, and trails that only a local mariner would know. "This," he said, tracing a finger along the coast, "is the entrance to Lemarchand's lair. Note the indentation along the cliffs, a natural harbor, narrow and concealed. It is here that he brings his goods, and from which he watches Mortemont without fear of interference. Observe, Watson, the line of sight is perfect for both observation and defense. One approach and you are visible, the other and you risk the waves. It is a fortress, masked by nature itself." Rue shivered beside us. "Monsieur, you speak of walking into the devil's lair. They are armed, cunning. The tide—" Holmes cut him off with a sharp glance. "Fear, Rue, will serve you poorly. Observation and reason, these will serve us. Keep your mind alert and your feet ready." We set off along the eastern cliffs, taking the narrow paths that wind between jagged rock and crashing surf. The air was rich with salt and the scent of algae. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and mournful, adding a ghostly accompaniment to our ascent. "The vegetation, Watson," Holmes said quietly, his eyes scanning every tuft of grass and stone. Here, the moss is worn. Footprints, faint though they are, mark the passage of men and small boats. The slope has been climbed more than once. Lemarchand's men move with precision. See here. He stooped, brushing aside a stone. Tar and rope fragments. These correspond with the evidence we observed near the chapel and on the shore. They are consistent. Patterns repeat, Watson. Patterns are our guide. I followed his gaze to the cliff below. There, partially hidden, lay the cove, a narrow inlet half swallowed by jagged rock, and at its mouth a small boat was drawn ashore, concealed beneath a tarpaulin. Holmes raised his hand. Watson, Root, observe. The sea hides, but it does not deceive. The boat is recent. Look at the watermarks, the wear of the planks. It has been used within the last tide. Root's face went pale. Monsieur, they know we watch. They will attack if we descend now. Then we observe, Holmes replied. Patience, my friend. Our quarry is cunning, but not infallible. We must wait for a signal. We crouched behind a rocky spur, hidden from the cove by the natural curvature of the cliffs. Holmes removed the Spanish stiletto from his coat and turned it over in his hands, his eyes reflecting a dark delight. Consider, Watson, he murmured. Lemarchand is no ordinary criminal. He is careful, calculating, and ruthless. Yet he must act. His need for secrecy combined with his arrogance means he will appear soon to inspect his cove. Observe how the tide rises, how the wind shifts. Nature itself conspires to reveal him to the vigilant. We waited, time stretching into tension. The tide shifted slowly, rolling pebbles and seaweed toward the cove. Then, faint at first, we heard the sound of footsteps, not the uncertain shuffle of frightened villagers, but the deliberate tread of one accustomed to moving along rock and sand. Holmes whispered, "He approaches, quietly now." Through the mist, a figure emerged, gaunt, tall, with a haggard aspect that somehow commanded authority. He moved with the surety of one who knew every crevice, every footing. Lemarchand himself. He approached the boat, checking its tarpaulin, inspecting the ropes and pulleys with meticulous care. I could see his hands, long and strong, coiling the lines with the precision of a man who had made this act a ritual. Holmes's eyes glittered. Mark the details, Watson. The angle of the rope, the spacing of the coils, the way he tests the knots. He is meticulous. Every movement betrays habit and obsession. The cove is his mind made manifest, ordered, concealed, yet capable of sudden violence. Then came the second figure. A younger man, lean and sharp-eyed, emerged from the shadows. He carried a basket of supplies, moving swiftly. Lemarchand's attention shifted toward him, the only sign of hesitation a slight tilt of the head. They spoke in low tones, Breton patois, which I could not decipher, but Holmes caught the nuance. "Instruction," he said softly. "This man is an underling. Lemarchand commands, and his word is obeyed without question. See the bow of respect? Note the lack of hesitation? These are marks of dominion, Watson, and proof that even those who serve him do so under threat or fanatic loyalty." I shivered. To watch a man orchestrate such a scene, knowing the power he wielded over life and death, was to glimpse the machinery of control itself. Holmes crouched lower. "The tide will hide our approach only so long. I intend to move closer, Watson. We shall observe the interior of the cove, the stores, and any evidence of contraband. There, in the very arrangement of goods, we shall find the signature of Lemarchand's enterprise." I nodded, though my heart pounded. The cove lay perhaps 20 feet below our perch, and the rocks between us and it were slick with spray. One misstep could send us to the surf below. Holmes took the first step downward, careful, deliberate. I followed, with Rue trembling beside me. The closer we came, the more evidence appeared. Broken crates, coils of rope, and scattered barrels, some stamped with foreign markings. The air smelled of brine and tar, of oil and gunpowder, a mixture that told a tale of trade both legitimate and illicit. Suddenly, Lemarchand looked up, his eyes piercing into the mist, as though he sensed the presence of observers. He bent slightly, speaking sharply to his underling. Holmes froze, a statue in the shadows. I could hear the faintest hiss of his breath. "He suspects," Holmes whispered. "We must be still. One move and all is lost." The underling scurried to fetch more supplies, leaving Lemarchand alone. Holmes signaled for us to move slightly closer, and we crept forward, every step measured, every breath partially shielded the cove's entrance, that we saw it. A hidden door carved into the cliff face, barely discernible, with chains dangling and a lock rusted with salt. Lemarchand approached it, key in hand, and disappeared inside. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Watson, there lies the heart of the operation. Every mystery of Mortemont converges there. Tonight we must explore it if courage and cunning permit. Inside that chamber, we shall uncover Lemarchand himself, or at least the secrets that have allowed him to cast fear over this island for a decade. Rue gasped audibly, but Holmes merely smiled grimly. Fear is the ally of the prudent, Watson, and courage the tool of the necessary. Prepare yourself. The next hours will be decisive. The air hung thick with the smell of brine and tar, and the waves crashed against the rocks below, each boom like a drumbeat counting down the moments of suspense. Holmes crouched behind the boulder, peering intently at the rusted door that Lemarchand had just entered. I felt my pulse hammer in my temples. The moment we had waited for was upon us. Watson, Holmes whispered, observe the construction of the door. Hand-forged iron, rusted in places, yet still capable of keeping out all but the most determined intruder. Notice how the hinges are riveted into the cliff itself. Lemarchand has taken every precaution to protect his secrets. Rue trembled beside me. Monsieur, do you think it wise to approach? If he discovers us? Holmes waved him into silence. There is no wisdom in retreat, Rue. There is only observation and the courage to act upon it. Now, note the chain. It is a recent addition, not rusted like the ironwork, fresh metal. He fears exposure or intrusion. That is precisely why we must investigate. He stepped lightly forward, brushing aside a clump of seaweed and examining the chain's lock. He muttered. No key, no simple lockpick will do. But observe, Watson, the shackle is spring-loaded. With a little ingenuity, it can be forced, and the door will yield. I swallowed hard. Holmes, you speak as though we are already inside. It is dangerous, too dangerous. Holmes's eyes glimmered in the dim light. Danger is the constant companion of discovery, my dear fellow. Every secret worth learning requires risk. Now help me here. Lift this corner of the boulder. There, perfect. We can approach unseen. We edged forward, hearts hammering, to a narrow ledge that brought us nearly level with the door. Lemarchand was nowhere to be seen. Presumably, he had entered the hidden chamber and was preoccupied within. Holmes examined the door minutely. The hinges are clever, Watson, but they betray themselves. If we apply force at the right points, we can spring them without alarming anyone inside. Watch me. He produced a small chisel from his coat and inserted it into a narrow crevice. I saw the muscles of his hands tense as he worked, the metal yielding ever so slightly under his pressure. The door shuddered. A faint click, then another. Holmes looked up at me with that rare, feral smile I had seen only in moments of triumph. It will open, soon, and then, Watson, we shall see the heart of Mortemont's mystery laid bare. I glanced down at the cove below, taking in the full scope of the hidden operations. Crates lay scattered along the pebbled shore, some marked with Spanish insignia, others with mysterious stamps I did not recognize. Coils of rope, barrels, and fishing nets were arranged with meticulous care. Even the waves seemed to respect the order, rolling up gently and receding as if guided by unseen hands. Rue swallowed audibly beside me. Monsieur, what do you expect to find? Contraband? Weapons? Holmes's gaze remained fixed on the door. Both and more, my boy. The contraband is the surface of the truth. What we seek is the motive, the mind, the intelligence behind it. That is where the peril and the revelation lies. At that moment, a shadow moved across the cove. Lemarchand's underling appeared at the mouth of the cave, carrying another basket of supplies. Holmes tensed, watching every step, every gesture. The man's movements were swift, economical, habitual. Clearly, he had performed this errand many times. Holmes whispered, Observation, Watson. We learn everything from their routine. Look at how he sets down the basket, how he checks the boat, how he closes the tarpaulin. This is Lemarchand's pattern. Every detail is a signature. We remained still for what seemed an eternity, hidden by boulders and shadow, while the underling departed again, leaving the door unguarded. Holmes turned to me and Rue. This is our moment, he said softly. No more waiting. We approach, we inspect, we record, quietly, and if we are discovered, his voice hardened, we rely on our wits. We crept forward, each step deliberate, careful not to disturb loose stones. Holmes produced a small lantern from his coat, lighting it just enough to illuminate the lock and chains without drawing attention. He examined them with a practiced eye. "The spring is delicate," he murmured. "One false move and it will snap. But the mechanism itself is ingenious. Lemarchand is clever, Watson, far cleverer than we imagined. Observe the alignment of the rivets. He does not trust even the elements, let alone intruders. He has accounted for everything except us." He worked in silence, the click of metal faint against the roar of the surf. I felt a thrill mingled with fear as the lock finally gave way. A slight push and the door creaked open, revealing a dark passage that led inward, deep into the cliff. The scent of brine, tar, and smoke drifted outward. Holmes gestured for us to follow. "Inward, Watson. The secrets of Mortemont await." We stepped cautiously into the passage. The walls were rough-hewn, dripping with moisture. The floor sloped slightly, and our footsteps echoed softly. Holmes paused frequently, listening, sniffing, examining the walls with his keen eye. Suddenly, a sound, a soft shuffle, the faintest whisper of movement ahead. Holmes held up a hand, and we froze. "There," he whispered. "Someone else is here, either Lemarchand himself or another of his men. Observe how the shadows fall, Watson. Every movement betrays presence. Every sound is a signal. We are not alone." We pressed against the wall as a figure emerged from a side tunnel, cloaked, hunched, and carrying a small crate. Holmes studied him intently. "An underling," he whispered, unaware of our presence, moving his burdens as if rehearsed 1,000 times. Notice how he carries it, how he pauses, how he listens. Every detail is a clue. We watched as the man passed and vanished deeper into the passage. Holmes's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Now," he said softly, "we follow, but quietly. One false step, Watson, and discovery is inevitable. The game has entered its most perilous stage. Lemarchand's secrets lie ahead, and with them, the truth of Mortemont itself." Chapter 6, Into the Lion's Den. The air within the cliff passage was dank and oppressive, laden with the smell of brine, tar, and the faint, acrid tang of oil. I could feel the chill crawling along my spine as we pressed further into the darkness. Holmes, however, moved with the grace and assurance of a cat in its own domain, his eyes reflecting a fierce gleam even in the dim glow of the lantern he carried. "Steady, Watson," he whispered, his voice a rasp of concentration. "Every step, every shadow, every sound may be a signal. Lemarchand is a man of precision. He trusts no one, yet he surrounds himself with those who do his bidding blindly. We must tread as ghosts." Rue shivered beside me, clinging to my coat. "Monsieur, it smells alive with secrets. I feel as though the walls themselves watch us." Holmes smiled faintly. "Walls do not watch, Rue. Men do. And we are close enough to see them, should they reveal the scuff marks. Men have carried heavy loads this way, dragging crates from the cove up into the cliff. They use this route daily. Every mark is a signature of habit, a map to their routines." We moved carefully, following the narrow passage as it curved, descending slightly until we reached a natural chamber carved into the rock. Crates and barrels were stacked in precise rows, tarpaulins covering their contents. Holmes paused, crouching beside one, his fingers brushing aside dust. "Observe," he murmured, "the arrangement. Not random. Every crate, every bundle, has been placed according to a plan. There is method here, an order that only the mind of Lemarchand could conceive. And see here." He held up a piece of paper, damp and salt-stained. "A ledger. Not fully preserved, but legible enough." I leaned closer. The writing was meticulous, in a cramped, angular hand. The ledger contained a record of goods received and sent, with markings indicating ships, dates, and destinations. Some were clearly legitimate trade, but others bore foreign marks I did not recognize. Spanish, Dutch, and even some coded symbols. "Weapons, perhaps," I suggested. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And more, Watson. The man deals in commerce of every sort, legal and illicit, using fear and superstition to shield his enterprise. Note the entries here. Barrels of powder, 12 delivered to Cove, 7 crates of brandy, hidden under tarp. It is a ledger of contraband, yes, but also of control. By knowing the supplies, he knows the islanders. By controlling the supplies, he controls them." A sudden noise froze us, a soft shuffle, almost imperceptible, yet enough for Holmes to press us against the wall. We held our breath as a figure emerged from a side tunnel, a young man carrying a lantern and a small crate. He paused, sniffing the air as though sensing something amiss, then muttered a phrase in Breton and continued onward. Holmes let out a barely audible whisper. "Underling, Watson. He carries the burdens of Lemarchand's enterprise, unaware of our presence. Every movement is habitual, drilled into him by fear or obedience. We waited, letting him disappear deeper into the shadows before continuing our inspection. Holmes moved quickly, lifting the tarpaulins and examining the contents of the crates. Powder, ropes, barrels of brandy, and small weapons, daggers, pistols, and knives neatly arranged, everything accounted for. Then, at the far end of the chamber, we discovered a door, heavier and more reinforced than the last. Its lock was complex, a mechanism clearly intended to resist tampering. Holmes examined it closely, tracing the contours with his fingertips. "This," he said softly, "is the sanctum. Beyond this lies Lemarchand himself, or at the very least the heart of his enterprise. Observe the scratches around the lock, frequent use, careful hands. Whoever opens this door does so with purpose. And Watson, the man behind it, is no ordinary criminal. He is a master of fear, of secrecy, and of control." I glanced at Holmes, noting the intensity in his eyes. "And you intend to open it?" He smiled faintly, almost grimly. "I intend to see what men like Lemarchand hide from the eyes of the wise of the world. That is all, Watson. Curiosity tempered by caution, nothing more." We paused, listening. The chamber beyond was silent, but the faint scent of smoke and tar suggested activity. Holmes produced a small tool from his coat, a slender instrument of steel, and set to work on the lock. The mechanism yielded slowly, each click of the tumblers resonating like a heartbeat in the stillness. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the far wall. Holmes froze, his hand still on the lock. I followed his gaze and saw it. Another underling, returning unexpectedly, lantern in hand. Holmes hissed, motioning us back. We pressed ourselves against the far wall as the man passed, muttering in Breton, unaware of our presence. Once he was gone, Holmes resumed his work, and after several tense minutes, the lock gave with a faint click. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairway descending further into darkness. The smell grew stronger, tar, brine, smoke, and something metallic, the unmistakable odor of gunpowder. Holmes stepped forward first, lantern raised, revealing a chamber at the bottom. Barrels lined the walls, crates stacked high. Maps, charts, and papers lay upon a wooden table in the center, as though the master of the lair had paused only briefly. And across the table, in a chair, sat Lemarchand himself, or a figure who might have been mistaken for death itself. Gaunt, pale, his eyes sharp and alert, the same presence Holmes had glimpsed from the cliffs. He looked up at our intrusion, a faint smile playing across his lips. "Ah," he said, voice low and deliberate. "The Englishman and his companion, bold or perhaps foolish to venture here. Tell me, who sends you to disturb my arrangements?" Holmes's eyes glittered. "We answer to no one, monsieur, and yet here we are. Mortemont has long suffered under your shadow. Tonight we seek the truth." Lemarchand's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "Truth, yes, but truth has a price. Are you prepared, gentlemen, to pay it?" Holmes stepped closer, calm and deliberate, every movement betraying the confidence of a man in control of the moment. "We are prepared, Lemarchand, but be warned. What you have built upon fear and deceit will not stand before reason and observation." The gaunt figure leaned back, eyes glinting. "Observation, yes, but observation can mislead. Let us see, then, what your reason can uncover." And with that, the true confrontation began, a battle of wits and nerves that would decide the fate of Mortemont itself. Lemarchand leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on us like a hawk regarding intruders in its nest. The room was dimly lit by a single lantern swinging gently from a hook in the ceiling, casting moving shadows upon the walls, stacked with barrels and crates. Every object, every creaking plank, seemed a deliberate part of the lair's design, as though the very architecture served the purpose of intimidation. Holmes stepped forward, deliberately slow, each movement measured. "Monsieur Lemarchand," he said evenly, "we have seen your operations, your methods, and your control over this island, your underlings, your cove, even your sham grave. It all betrays an intelligence which, while remarkable, thrives upon fear and secrecy, but secrecy cannot endure forever." Lemarchand's smile remained fixed, thin and pale. "You speak boldly, Englishman, and yet you have walked into my chamber uninvited. You have seen what should never be seen. Tell me, what do you intend to do with this knowledge?" Holmes's eyes glittered. "Expose it, reveal it, and understand it. Knowledge is the only currency with which men like you are ultimately confronted. Mortemont has suffered under your shadow for 10 years. That ends tonight." Lemarchand's gaze hardened. He pushed back from the table and gestured toward the crates along the wall. "You speak of knowledge. Perhaps you would like to examine it more closely?" He lifted a sheet from the table, a ledger, much like the one we had seen earlier, then began opening crates. Inside were more papers, maps, and bundles of letters tied carefully with string. Holmes immediately bent over them, scanning, eyes moving rapidly. "These," he whispered to me, "are the record of Lemarchand's entire enterprise. Shipments, contacts, secret deliveries, codes. Every step of his control over Mortemont meticulously documented. The precision of a master. And yet, patterns emerge." I bent over the ledger with him. The entries were methodical. Dates, quantities, recipients, cryptic codes, some referencing ships we had seen anchored offshore, others using initials or symbols that suggested concealment. I could see how the man's power had spread over the island, controlling the villagers without their full series of marks in the ledger. "Here, look, Watson. These repeated letters, the triangle symbols. Each marks the transport of weapons, but also of human assets. These are not mere smugglers. Lemarchand traffics influence, secrets, even lives. The village is complicit, but under his control. He has orchestrated fear so deeply that no one dares defy him openly." Lemarchand's voice cut through our observations, calm and deliberate. "And yet, Englishman, you continue to pry. Curious creatures, you. You see order where I see only efficiency, meaning where I see necessity. Do you truly believe you can unravel 10 years of careful design without consequence?" Holmes did not flinch. "We do not merely believe, monsieur. We know. Observation, deduction, and reason are stronger than superstition or fear. We have seen the patterns you believe hidden." A faint creak echoed from the shadows. I turned and glimpsed movement near a side tunnel, a second underling returning sooner than expected. His lantern cast a thin cone of light across the chamber, threatening to illuminate our presence. Holmes caught it instantly. "Rue, here," he hissed. "Do not speak. Follow my lead." We moved with careful precision, Holmes silently signaling us to advance toward the back of the room, toward a small alcove. Lemarchand, absorbed in showing us his records, had not yet noticed. I felt my pulse quicken, aware that a single misstep would provoke disaster. Holmes bent over one of the crates, examining the contents. Barrels of powder, small firearms, and crates of brandy. He paused, lifting one carefully, and found a hidden compartment beneath. Inside were letters, correspondence with unknown figures, coded instructions, and a map marked with several locations beyond the island. "Ah," Holmes murmured, "here is the spine of the operation. Lemarchand's reach extends beyond Mortemont, into the Channel, perhaps even to Spain itself. And these letters," he handed one to me, "detail names of agents and collaborators. One slip, one revelation, and the entire network could be exposed." Lemarchand finally turned his head, noticing our movement. His eyes narrowed, and in an instant he drew a pistol from his belt. "Enough!" he barked, his voice a whip crack of authority. "You have trespassed too far, men!" From the shadows, 2 underlings emerged, weapons in hand, advancing toward us with deliberate menace. The chamber, once dimly quiet, now thrummed with imminent violence. Holmes did not flinch. He raised a hand, signaling for Rue and me to stay calm. Then, with astonishing swiftness, he produced his Spanish stiletto. A flash, a deft movement, and the nearest man froze, the blade threatening, forcing him back. "Step carefully, Watson," Holmes whispered, moving forward. "Our advantage lies in surprise and agility. One wrong move, and Lemarchand's men will overwhelm us." Lemarchand's gaze was sharp, calculating. "You have skill, Englishman, but skill will not save you. This lair is my domain. Every exit, every corner, every shadow belongs to me." Holmes's eyes glittered. "And yet, monsieur, you fail to account for observation, for deduction, and for courage, Watson." I realized with a sudden surge of clarity that we were no longer merely observers. We were active participants in a high-stakes chess match. Every move watched, every reaction calculated. Lemarchand was formidable, yes, but Holmes's mind was already several steps ahead. The first underling lunged. Holmes sidestepped, forcing him against a stack of crates. I followed, drawing my revolver, ready to protect us if necessary. Rue, trembling but resolute, clutched a nearby beam, prepared to strike if needed. Lemarchand's calm demeanor wavered only slightly. "So," he said, "you confront me directly. Bold, Very well. Let us see if your wits match your courage. Holmes's gaze met his unflinchingly. We do not intend merely to confront, monsieur. We intend to uncover. Mortemont's shadows end tonight, and you, Pierre Lemarchand, shall answer for them. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the surf pounded the cliff, a roaring accompaniment to the tension within. And in that moment, I knew that the confrontation was no longer about secrecy or contraband. It was about the very heart of Lemarchand's power, and whether fear or reason would prevail. Lemarchand's eyes glinted with a mix of admiration and menace as he slowly straightened, the pistol in his hand unwavering. So the Englishman and his companions dare to enter my private domain, he said. Curiosity is admirable, but reckless. Do you truly believe that observation and deduction will shield you from what comes next? Holmes's expression remained calm, almost serene. Observation, deduction, courage, they have shielded us thus far, monsieur. And it is only through understanding a man's mind, not his muscle, that the truth of Mortemont may be revealed. Lemarchand's lips curled in a faint sneer. Ah, the great detective speaks of understanding. Very well. Perhaps you shall have an opportunity to exercise your reasoning. He motioned to his underlings, who advanced with measured precision. The room's shadows deepened, and I realized with a jolt that the crates and barrels off cover, but also potential traps. Holmes whispered to us, Rue, Watson, we are now part of the drama. Every step must be calculated. Distract if you can, conceal if you must. The man before us relies on fear and obedience. We shall turn both against him. The first underling lunged toward Holmes with a crude swing of his cudgel. Holmes sidestepped with feline grace, letting the man crash into a stack of barrels, which sent a cascade of crates clattering. The noise startled Lemarchand, but he remained poised, his pistol trained on us. I fired a warning shot toward the ceiling, more to startle than harm. The underling froze, and Rue, inspired by Holmes's deftness, grabbed a coil of rope, swinging it with all his strength. The rope wrapped around the second man's legs, tripping him. Holmes seized the moment, darting toward Lemarchand's table, sweeping the ledger and the letters into a satchel he carried. Lemarchand's eyes flared. You would rob me of my work, he exclaimed. You presume too much, Englishman. Holmes paused, standing upright, the satchel clutched under his arm. Not presume, monsieur. Only take what may serve the light of justice. These records reveal your methods, your network, and your reach. Mortemont will no longer cower under shadows you have cast. For a moment, Lemarchand's facade faltered. His voice was quieter, almost fascinated. You understand the design, the structure, but do you know the price? Do you know the sacrifices that have made my empire possible? Holmes's eyes glittered with steel. I know only that fear and control are no substitute for morality. Your sacrifices are debts to the living, monsieur, and debts can be called in. We have come to collect. Suddenly, a sharp shout echoed from the side passage. More of Lemarchand's men were approaching, alerted by the noise. Holmes gestured toward a narrow tunnel partially concealed by barrels. Quickly, Watson, Rook, this way. We dashed toward the tunnel, the walls pressing close, the damp air thick. Behind us, shouts and the pounding of boots grew louder. Lemarchand's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. You cannot escape. Every path leads to me. You will pay for this insolence. Holmes moved with uncanny swiftness, pulling us along, checking every turn. The passage narrowed dangerously, water dripping from the ceiling. My lungs burned, my muscles ached, but we pressed on, guided by Holmes's unerring sense of direction. Finally, we emerged at a hidden fissure in the cliff face, barely wide enough to allow our passage. Beyond it, the dawn-lit sea gleamed, waves rolling against the jagged rocks below. Holmes paused, peering out. We can reach the tide is favorable, and circle back to the village. Lemarchand may chase, but the sea will hinder him. Every path he relies upon is now known to us. We climbed carefully onto the rocks above the surf. Lemarchand and some of his men appeared at the mouth of the lair, shouting and gesturing, but the height and treacherous drops forced them to pause. Holmes turned to me and Rue. Remember, Watson, courage and observation have carried us this far. The records we bear may expose his network, but we must return carefully. One misstep now, and all is lost. With slow, deliberate steps, we retraced the path along the cliffside. The roar of the surf below reminded me how close we had come to disaster, and yet Holmes moved as if the danger itself were a familiar companion. Lemarchand's shouts faded as we gained distance, and soon only the wind and the cries of gulls accompanied our flight. Back at the tavern, soaked and exhausted, Holmes spread the stolen ledger across the table. "See, Watson," he said, "every entry, every code, every shipment, this is the structure of Lemarchand's dominion. And yet, even in his meticulous control, patterns emerged. We can unravel them. We can undo his tyranny over Mortemont." Roux leaned back, trembling. "Monsieur, he will come for us. He will not forgive this intrusion." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps not, but courage and cunning can match even the most ruthless. And now, Watson, we have the tools. The game has begun in earnest, and Lemarchand himself is revealed to us at last." I looked at the ledger, at the maps and coded letters, and realized with a mixture of awe and apprehension that the quiet village we had come to visit was in truth a theater of secrets, and we had become central actors in its dark drama. Chapter 7. The Web of Secrets. The tavern, quiet now in the aftermath of our daring infiltration, felt oddly claustrophobic. The morning sun poured weakly through grimy windows, falling across the battered table where Holmes had spread Lemarchand's ledger, maps, and letters. Even with the tumult of the previous hours behind us, the weight of the evidence seemed to press down upon the room, demanding attention and understanding. Holmes leaned over the spread of papers, his eyes sharp and alert, tracing lines, marking symbols with a pencil he produced from his coat. "See here, Watson," he said, tapping the ledger with a gloved finger. "The codes are not random. They follow a pattern of frequency and repetition, a cipher designed not merely to conceal but to organize. Lemarchand's genius is in his structure. The ordinary eye sees trade, but we see a network, a hierarchy, and routes for intelligence and contraband." Roux, still pale from our escape, shuffled uneasily in the corner. "Monsieur, do you truly think we can read these codes? They are beyond comprehension to any ordinary man." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint, almost amused smile. "Roux, it is precisely the ordinary man's incomprehension that allows Lemarchand to operate with impunity. Observation, logic, and a measure of intuition are all we require. The letters contain repeated symbols and numerals, which correspond to routes, shipments, and perhaps most crucially, the identity of his agents. Once deciphered, the ledger becomes a map of his dominion." I leaned closer, squinting at the cramped, angular handwriting and the cryptic symbols. Even as a physician, trained in the careful observation of details, the complexity of the codes was daunting. Yet Holmes moved with a confidence that made the impossible seem natural. Hours passed as we labored over the papers. Holmes worked methodically, cross-referencing dates, symbols, and annotations. Slowly, patterns emerged, recurring letters, repeated shapes resembling triangles and diamonds, and a set of numbers that appeared to mark time or quantity. "See here, Watson," Holmes said at length, tapping a series of symbols with his pencil. "The triangle represents a location of significance, a rendezvous, a supply drop, or a safe house. The numbers indicate the day and tide for activity. The letters, usually initials, mark agents, those who move goods or information." Roux stared at the notations helplessly. "Monsieur, this is remarkable. It is as though he controls every step of the island, unseen and all-knowing." Holmes leaned back, eyes bright. "Control, yes, but even the most cunning plan is vulnerable to disruption. Observe the intervals in the shipments. There are weaknesses, gaps, moments when Lemarchand relies upon fear rather than vigilance. These gaps shall be our opportunity." We paused as a knock sounded at the tavern door. I drew my revolver instinctively, though Holmes merely raised a finger for silence. The door creaked, and a figure stepped inside. It was Roux's cousin, Etienne, a wiry young man with sharp eyes. "You called for him?" I asked Holmes. "Indeed," he replied. "Etienne has knowledge of the village paths and local habits. He can guide us without alerting Lemarchand's spies. Every ally is vital, even one with no taste for danger." Etienne approached, glancing nervously at the papers. "You have come back from the cove? You saw him?" Holmes inclined his head. "We did, and we have returned with evidence, proof of Lemarchand's network. But we require your guidance to navigate the village without arousing suspicion. The shadows have eyes, and every man who serves Lemarchand is a potential spy." Etienne nodded, and we spent the next hour planning. Holmes divided tasks with methodical precision. I would accompany Rue to discreetly gather information from the villagers. Etienne would act as guide, and Holmes would continue deciphering the ledger while preparing to lay a trap for Lemarchand's agents. By mid-afternoon, the sun had climbed high and we set out into the village. Holmes, always a master of observation, noticed details I might have missed entirely. Subtle changes in behavior among the townsfolk, a fisherman casting furtive glances toward the tavern, a child hastily covering a crate as we passed. Fear is Lemarchand's instrument, Holmes whispered as we moved. Notice the reluctance in their eyes, the hesitation in their movements. Each man and woman here lives under his shadow, yet even fear is predictable, Watson, and predictability is the key to control. We moved through narrow alleyways and winding streets, Etienne leading us carefully to the homes of trusted villagers. Holmes spoke quietly with each, noting discrepancies between what they said and what their behavior revealed. Some spoke freely of shortages or shipments, others avoided the subject entirely, yet their movements betrayed knowledge they dared not admit. At one modest cottage we met a woman, her hands calloused from years of labor, eyes wary but sharp. She spoke of the arrival of goods at the northern dock, mentioning strange visitors, coded signals, and a mysterious man she only knew as the Master. Holmes took meticulous notes, piecing together the network like a puzzle. "See, Watson," he said after we departed, "even those who fear Lemarchand most cannot conceal everything. Human nature betrays the secret, even when words attempt to disguise it. Observation, coupled with deduction, allows us to reconstruct the network from fragments of testimony." As dusk approached, we returned to the tavern. Holmes spread the ledger once more, cross-referencing our newly acquired intelligence with the coded entries. Patterns became clearer. We now knew not only the locations of Lemarchand's operations, but also the schedule of his agents. Holmes's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Now, Watson, we can act. Lemarchand relies upon his network, and his network has predictable rhythms. If we disrupt the channels, expose the truth, and bait him into overconfidence, we can bring him to the light. Mortemont will see his empire undone." Rue trembled, excitement and fear mingling. Holmes's gaze sharpened, a dangerous light in his eyes. "He will reveal himself, Rue, one way or another, and when he does, we shall be ready. Observation, deduction, courage, these shall be our weapons." The tavern seemed suddenly charged with anticipation. Outside, the gulls cried, the waves crashed against the cliffs, and the village lay quiet, unsuspecting of the storm about to descend. Holmes had mapped the web of secrets, and for the first time, the possibility of bringing Lemarchand to justice seemed tangible. But in the shadows, I sensed that the danger had only deepened. Lemarchand was cunning, ruthless, and aware, though not yet fully of our knowledge. And in Mortemont, secrets were as deadly as daggers. Night fell over Mortemont like a velvet shroud, wrapping the village in darkness and whispers. The tavern was quiet, its wooden beams creaking softly with the wind from the cliffs. Holmes had prepared us for what was to come, a reconnaissance mission to intercept Lemarchand's agents and trace his shipments before he realized we had infiltrated his network. "Watson," he said, folding the ledger carefully and tucking it to his coat, "the web has threads, some taut, some slack. Our task is to grasp the slack threads first and see which unravel if we pull them. Lemarchand relies on fear, yes, but more on routine. Routine, Watson, is predictable." Rue's hands shook as he adjusted the scarf around his neck. "Monsieur, I'm not accustomed to such daring. The cove, the lair, and now this. How can we hope to outmaneuver him?" Holmes's eyes glittered. "We do not outmaneuver with force, Rue. We outmaneuver with understanding, observation, deduction, and the calculated use of fear and surprise. You will see. The first step is to intercept the northern dock shipment. Etienne will guide us." We left the tavern under the cloak of darkness, Etienne leading the way through narrow alleyways. The streets were empty, though occasional flickers of candlelight suggested villagers awake but wary. Holmes moved silently, his gaze scanning every shadow, listening to every faint sound. At the northern dock, the scene was precisely as Etienne had described, a small boat drawn ashore, lantern light glinting on ropes and crates. Two figures moved quietly, arranging barrels and bundles. Holmes signaled for us to remain hidden, crouching behind crates, and he crept closer, observing. "Note," he whispered, "the spacing, the angles, the pauses. They are not merely unloading, they are following a ritual, a pattern learned to perfection. That is the strength and the weakness of Lemarchand's network. The moment a pattern is disrupted, hesitation occurs, and that is our opportunity. I felt my pulse quicken as Holmes slid forward and down with a deft movement, lifted a crate's tarp. Inside we found letters and papers, dispatches, coded instructions, and small packets, each meticulously labeled. Holmes pocketed a few, leaving the crate otherwise undisturbed. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "This is the lifeblood of Lemarchand's control. Messages between agents, instructions for shipments, details of deliveries, and perhaps even hints toward his true identity. We take only what is necessary and retreat unseen. Precision, discretion. These are our allies tonight." As we withdrew along the edge of the dock, a shadow moved in the corner of my eye. One of Lemarchand's men, returning earlier than expected, approached the boat. Holmes froze, and I instinctively pressed against him. The man lingered, peering into the water, then muttered a phrase in Breton and turned away. Holmes's voice was a mere whisper. He did not see us. Timing is everything. We move when opportunity presents itself, not before. We circled the dock, taking care to remain in shadow, and returned to the village via a narrow trail Etienne knew well. Once inside the safety of the tavern, Holmes immediately spread the intercepted papers on the table, cross-referencing them with the ledger and the information we had gathered from villagers earlier. "Patterns," he said, tracing lines across the documents. "Observe here. Shipments coincide with tides, and the coded initials match the agents' names discovered in the ledger. Lemarchand relies upon secrecy, but humans make errors, even his agents." Roux shook his head, exhausted. "Monsieur, it is incredible. Every step seems so complex, yet you make it understandable. I do not know how you do it." Holmes's expression was focused, intense. "Deduction, Watson, observation, and patience. And now we have a chance to strike. By exposing a shipment, intercepting an agent, or revealing a pattern, we can disrupt Lemarchand's control. And once the network wavers, the man himself becomes vulnerable." We spent the next hours preparing. Holmes carefully folded and marked the ledger, ensuring all evidence was secure. Etienne confirmed safe paths through the village, avoiding spies and patrols. Roux, though nervous, was taught to watch, note, and report anomalies. Finally, Holmes looked at us with the familiar glint in his eyes. "Tomorrow night, Watson, we begin the first overt move against Lemarchand. We shall test his network, disrupt a shipment, and observe his reaction. The night is our ally, and Mortemont shall see that fear is not invincible." I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. Lemarchand was cunning, ruthless, and always a step ahead, or so it seemed. But Holmes, with his unerring insight, had seen patterns invisible to ordinary men. I trusted him, though the stakes could not be higher. The life of the village, the safety of our friends, and our own survival rested upon our next actions. Outside, the waves pounded the cliffs as if in warning, and the gulls circled above, their cries harsh in the night air. Holmes, ever vigilant, watched them for a moment, then turned back to the papers. "Tomorrow, Watson," he said softly, "the web begins to unravel. Lemarchand has ruled through fear, but fear is a fragile thing, and tonight we shall see it tested." Night descended over Mortemont with a heavy silence, broken only by the distant roar of the surf against the cliffs. Holmes, Roux, Etienne, and I moved carefully through the winding streets, each step calculated to avoid observation. Lanterns flickered in windows, casting long shadows, but the village seemed largely asleep, unaware that its hidden tyrant's web was about to be disrupted. Holmes crouched behind a low wall, gesturing for us to do the same. "Patience, Watson. Observation first, action second. The shipment must be intercepted without alerting Lemarchand's men until the moment is ours. Once panic sets in, the dominoes will fall." Etienne led us toward the northern dock, where earlier we had observed the boat and its cargo. Tonight it was even quieter. A single lantern bobbed atop a barrel, and two figures worked to secure crates onto the small boat, speaking in low Breton tones. Holmes signaled for us to split. Roux and I would take the left flank, concealing ourselves behind crates and barrels, while Holmes and Etienne approached the right, closer to the boat's edge. Every movement was deliberate, measured, silent. "Observe their habits," Holmes whispered. "See how they handle the cargo, the sequence they follow. Fear will appear only when we disrupt the pattern. Timing is critical." I felt my pulse hammering as we moved closer. Holmes crouched near the boat, producing a small cutting tool. With careful precision, he severed a rope securing one of the crates. It fell with a muffled thud into the water. One of the men looked up immediately, confusion flickering in his eyes. Holmes had anticipated this. A shadow fell across the dock, Etienne signaling the others to advance. The second crate was loosened, spilling its contents, letters and coded packages across the planks. The first man shouted. He bent to gather the papers, unaware that Holmes had already pocketed several key documents. The second man, realizing the disruption, drew a pistol, aiming at our shadows. "Now, Watson," Holmes hissed. We moved in unison, Rue and I diving toward cover as Etienne distracted the men with a sudden shout and throwing a small crate into the water. The sound splashed, startling the men further. Holmes leapt toward the first man, striking the arm holding the pistol with a practiced sweep of his stiletto. The weapon clattered to the planks. Chaos erupted. The two men lunged to recover their crates, shouting orders in Breton, their voices carrying across the empty dock. Holmes, calm as ever, moved to retrieve another bundle of papers, rifling through them to find the codes linking the shipment to Lemarchand's wider network. I noticed movement along the cliff edge. Another agent, returning earlier than expected. Holmes caught it, signaling us to duck behind barrels. The man paused, lantern casting his shadow across the dock, then muttered something and retreated. "Timing," Holmes whispered, his eyes glittering, "is everything. They follow routine. When that routine is disrupted, fear spreads like fire through dry brush. And now, Watson, the first seeds of panic have been sown." We retreated along the alleyways with the intercepted papers. Once inside the tavern, Holmes spread the documents across the table, comparing them to the ledger we had taken from the lair. Slowly, the connections became clear. Dates, locations, coded initials, and delivery schedules. "Observe," Holmes said, pointing to a series of repeated symbols. The triangle marks a rendezvous, the diamond, a shipment of weapons, letters, the agents responsible. One mistake here, a delay there, and Lemarchand's control falters. The first step is taken. Mortemont will awaken tomorrow to find the chains of fear loosened, though they will not yet know it. Rue exhaled shakily. And the master himself? Lemarchand, will he come? Holmes's gaze was unwavering. He will. Every network has a guardian, every empire a center of gravity. Once the threads begin to unravel, the center is forced to act. Lemarchand will make his move, and when he does, we shall be ready. I looked at the papers, the maps, the codes, and the ledger. For the first time, I felt that we were not merely observers or pursuers. We were orchestrating the beginning of the collapse of a man's entire dominion over the island. Outside, the gulls cried over the cliffs, the waves crashed in rhythm with our heartbeat, and Mortemont itself seemed to hold its breath. Holmes, as ever, was already planning the next step. Further disruption of shipments, tracing agents, and setting a trap for Lemarchand himself. Tonight had been only the first move. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning. Chapter 8. The tide turns. The morning light over Mortemont seemed deceptively calm, the village streets quiet and orderly, yet beneath the surface a storm was brewing. Lemarchand had discovered the disruption at the northern dock, and I could sense the tension in every glance, every hushed conversation. The villagers moved cautiously, aware of some unseen disturbance but not yet understanding its cause. Holmes and I met in the tavern, the ledger and intercepted papers spread across the worn oak table. His eyes were alight with determination. "Watson," he said, tapping the ledger with a precise finger. "The first step succeeded. The shipment disruption has created confusion and fear. Lemarchand's agents are already retracing their steps, trying to identify the source, and in doing so, they reveal themselves. Fear, once sown, reveals secrets as surely as light reveals shadows." Rue, jittery and still pale from the previous night's exploits, muttered, "Monsieur, this is dangerous. He will not sit idle. If he discovers we are responsible—" Holmes waved him into silence. "Danger, Rue, is the companion of truth. Lemarchand thrives on intimidation, but he cannot anticipate every observation, every deduction. We have one advantage, knowledge. And knowledge, wielded correctly, can become a weapon more precise than any blade or firearm." Etienne arrived with news. Lemarchand had convened his lieutenants, moving rapidly to consolidate control and assess the breach. "He suspects the dock," Etienne whispered. and has begun sending men into the village. Anyone acting strangely may be an agent or an informer. Caution is paramount. Holmes nodded, eyes scanning the ledger. We must now use what we have learned to turn his own network against him. The patterns are clear. Shipments, rendezvous points, agent identities. If we set a trap using this knowledge, we can draw Lemarchand himself into the open. We moved through the village with stealth, observing the reactions of those around us. Subtle signs of Lemarchand's tightening grip were everywhere. Closed shutters, furtive glances, whispered warnings. Holmes noted everything. The direction of movement, pauses, hesitations, even the positioning of crates and carts along the streets. At the village square, he paused beside a fountain. Observe, Watson. Lemarchand relies upon fear, yes, but also upon routine. Each movement, each shipment, each signal is a thread in his web. Disrupt the threads carefully and the web collapses, and when it collapses, the man himself becomes vulnerable. By late afternoon, Holmes had devised a plan. Using the ledger and intercepted documents, we predicted the movements of Lemarchand's agents and a secondary shipment scheduled for the cliffs above the village. The goal was simple: intercept the shipment, expose the agents, and bait Lemarchand into revealing himself. As dusk fell, we positioned ourselves strategically along the path the shipment would take. Etienne, familiar with every alley and hidden passage, guided us, while Holmes and I prepared the necessary tools for observation and concealment. Roux, though apprehensive, was assigned to monitor a side path, ready to signal us if anything unexpected occurred. The first agent appeared, moving cautiously, crates balanced on his shoulder. Holmes observed silently, noting every step, every glance. When the second agent approached, Holmes gave a subtle signal. Etienne emerged from shadow, blocking their path. The agents froze, startled. "Observe, Watson," Holmes whispered. "Fear now works in our favor. These men are trained, yes, but not prepared for disruption, and their hesitation reveals their weaknesses." The confrontation was brief but decisive. The agents were intercepted, their crates examined, their coded papers collected. One tried to flee, but Roux, though nervous, blocked the path. Holmes's voice cut through the tense night. "You will not escape, monsieur," he said coldly. "Your master's network begins to unravel. Every shipment, every agent, every route exposed tonight." The captured men looked from Holmes to us, uncertainty and fear written plainly across their faces. They had been instruments of Lemarchand's control, and now they realized that control was slipping. From a hidden vantage point, Holmes noted movement in the shadows. Lemarchand himself, watching from a distance, assessing the situation. His presence was commanding, and yet he did not intervene directly. Instead, he observed, calculating, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Holmes whispered to me, "The center of gravity is revealed, Watson. Lemarchand watches, but he also reacts. Every reaction is a signal. We shall use it to anticipate his next move." The night deepened, waves crashing against the cliffs as if echoing the turmoil below. Mortemont lay in uneasy suspense. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he studied the village, the captured agents, and the surrounding shadows. The first threads of Lemarchand's empire had been pulled, and already the strands were fraying. "Tomorrow," Holmes said quietly, "we shall be forced to act. And when he does, Watson, we shall be ready." Outside, the wind carried the scent of the sea and the faintest hint of smoke. Somewhere in the darkness, Lemarchand plotted, unseen but aware. And we, guided by deduction, observation, and courage, were poised for the next decisive move. The village slept fitfully under a veil of uncertainty. Every shuttered window, every whispered word betrayed the undercurrent of fear that Lemarchand had meticulously cultivated, and that Holmes was now using against him. Holmes moved with methodical precision, retracing the movements of the captured agents. He studied their routes, the timing of their signals, and the way they carried their loads. "Every agent, every shipment, every delay reveals a fault line," he said, tracing lines across the ledger. "Fear has a rhythm, Watson, and it can be measured, exploited." Roux, still pale from the previous night, whispered, "Monsieur, what if Lemarchand himself moves tonight? What if he discovers the disruption and comes after us?" Holmes's expression was unreadable, but his voice was calm. "He may come, Roux, but even Lemarchand cannot be everywhere at once. And tonight, we control the flow of information. We decide where he will be, what he will see, and how he reacts." Etienne returned from a reconnaissance mission, his eyes sharp. He knows something is amiss. Some of his men report missing shipments, delays, discrepancies. The master himself is moving through the village, checking, probing. Be careful, he is a dangerous man. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Excellent, let him probe, let him act. Every step will be predictable if we understand the patterns, and Watson, when he acts, we shall be ready. Night fell again, darker and colder. Holmes positioned us strategically along the expected route of Lemarchand's personal agents. The plan was to intercept a secondary shipment before it reached the cliffside storage, forcing Lemarchand to reveal his hand. We crouched in the shadow of a stone wall, Etienne guiding us silently, Rue trembling beside me. From the darkness came movement, two figures carrying crates with careful precision. Holmes signaled for us to hold. "They are skilled, Watson," he whispered. "Trained, alert, but not immune to surprise. Observe the small pauses, the shifts in weight, the way they handle the load. Any hesitation is an opportunity." Holmes advanced slightly, using the cover of darkness to move closer. With a subtle gesture, he directed Etienne to block one path while Rue and I approached another. The first agent froze, startled by a sudden, muffled sound, a crate sliding off a plank into the shadows below. Holmes struck with the precision of a surgeon. A swift movement, a gentle shove, and the first agent toppled, dropping his lantern. The shadows flickered wildly. The second agent raised his weapon, but Rue, though shaking, blocked his path. "Step aside," Holmes commanded softly, "or you will find the consequences most unpleasant." The agent hesitated, eyes darting between Holmes and us. Then, with a muttered curse in Breton, he fled into the darkness, leaving crates and coded papers exposed. Holmes moved quickly, rifling through the bundles, extracting letters and documents critical to unraveling Lemarchand's network. From the alley behind us, a familiar figure emerged, Lemarchand himself, moving with deliberate, silent steps. His presence was commanding. The shadows seemed to cling to him, yet he made no immediate move. Holmes's eyes did not waver. "Observe, Watson," he whispered. "The man has come. Every step is a signal, every gesture deliberate. He wishes to assess the damage personally, and in doing so, he will reveal the structure of his control." Lemarchand's gaze swept over the disrupted crates and papers. His face, pale and sharp, betrayed little emotion, yet his eyes glimmered with calculation. He raised a hand slightly, signaling to the shadows behind him, more agents emerging to assess the situation. Holmes leaned closer, whispering, "Now we proceed with caution. Our advantage lies in his overconfidence. He believes his network is unbreakable. We know otherwise. Every move must be measured, every reaction anticipated." The village square became a stage. Lemarchand's men moved cautiously, gathering crates, whispering orders. Holmes and I observed from the shadows, noting every hesitation, every glance, every subtle misstep. The disruption we had initiated had begun to ripple outward, shaking the foundations of Lemarchand's control. Rue, white and tense, whispered, "Monsieur, do you truly believe we can force him to act? That he will make a mistake?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Not believe, Watson. No. Patterns, observation, deduction. These will guide him into the position we choose. And when he acts, we shall be ready to turn his strength into weakness." Suddenly, a shout rang out from the far end of the square. One of Lemarchand's agents had spotted a bundle of papers we had left deliberately exposed. The shout triggered chaos. The men scattered, their discipline faltering, revealing cracks in the once impenetrable network. Holmes seized the moment. "Now, Watson, Rue, Etienne, observe closely and note the reactions. The master's empire begins to unravel before our eyes. Fear, once sown carefully, can destroy even the most formidable control." From the shadows, Lemarchand's cold eyes watched us, calculating, measuring, weighing each action. The trap was set, the web was fraying, and the tide had begun to turn in our favor. Lemarchand stepped forward from the shadows, his tall frame commanding attention, every movement deliberate. His eyes, cold and calculating, flicked over the scattered crates, the bundles of papers, and the few agents still regrouping. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Holmes did not move, did not flinch. He held the ledger under one arm, his gaze fixed steadily on Lemarchand. "Monsieur," he said evenly, "you see now that your control is not absolute. Even the most meticulously maintained network can falter. Fear has limits, and all empires built on fear eventually reveal their weaknesses. Lemarchand's thin lips curled into a smile, faint but unsettling. Englishman, you overestimate your understanding. Fear is not a tool, it is the essence of control. Mortemont itself bends beneath it, and yet here you are disrupting what I have maintained for a decade. Tell me, what gives you such confidence? Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet fury. Confidence, monsieur, is earned through observation, deduction, and courage. Every shipment, every agent, every routine under your command has patterns, and patterns can be anticipated, exploited, and broken. You may see control, but we see the threads. Lemarchand's gaze narrowed. He gestured sharply with one hand, and two of his men advanced toward us. Holmes shifted slightly, positioning himself between the agents and the ledger. Step aside, Englishman, Lemarchand said, voice low, dangerous. You meddle where you do not belong. This village, these people, they are mine to command. You will learn the cost of your intrusion. Holmes smiled faintly, almost grimly. Perhaps, monsieur, but the cost will be yours. Every step you take now, every move you make is visible to us. Fear may guide your agents, but logic guides us, and logic, unlike fear, is inexorable. The first agent lunged suddenly, a crude dagger in hand. Holmes, anticipating the movement, sidestepped with fluid grace, letting the man crash into a stack of crates. The second agent raised his weapon, but Roux, trembling yet determined, stepped forward to block the path, while Etienne moved to flank the second man, forcing him back toward Lemarchand. You see, Watson, Holmes whispered, they respond to threat as we predicted. Every hesitation, every error, but not for unpredictability. Lemarchand's eyes narrowed as he studied Holmes, assessing the situation. You may have disrupted my men, he said, voice calm yet edged with steel, but the master's hand is not so easily checked. You force my actions, and yet you cannot anticipate all consequences. What will you do when I strike at those you care for? Holmes's expression remained unflinching. Threats are the tools of tyrants, monsieur, but courage and reason are stronger. We have already seen the cracks in your network, and they widen by the moment. Mortemont will no longer tremble under shadows. The tension in the square was palpable. The few remaining agents glanced nervously between their master and Holmes, unsure of where to place their loyalty. Holmes slowly approached Mortemont, the ledger held tightly under one arm, every movement deliberate and measured. You have built your empire on fear and secrecy, Holmes said, voice low, resonant. But secrets are fragile, and fear can be turned against you. Mortemont will awaken to truth, monsieur, and when it does, it will no longer obey you blindly. Lemarchand's pale face betrayed only the faintest flicker of unease. Englishman, you speak boldly, perhaps too boldly. But remember this, I have survived men far more clever than you. The tide always returns, Watson, and the sea devours what it chooses. Holmes's eyes glimmered with steel. Then let us see whose tide is stronger and whose courage endures. The reckoning begins tonight. At that moment, a loud crash echoed from the alleyway behind Lemarchand. One of the disrupted shipments, a pile of crates we had left strategically, had been set ablaze, smoke curling skyward. The sudden commotion drew Lemarchand's men, splitting their attention and creating chaos in the square. Holmes seized the moment. Watson, Roux, Etienne, the disruption is working. Observe their reactions and be ready to act. Lemarchand's eyes narrowed, realizing the trap we had set. His agents, previously disciplined, scrambled in confusion. Holmes moved swiftly, positioning us to intercept any attempt by Lemarchand to reclaim control. The village square became a theater of strategy, with shadows, lanterns, and scattered crates forming the board upon which we played. Every move now, Watson, is calculated, Holmes whispered. We force him into decisions, into mistakes. Courage, observation, deduction, these shall determine who controls Mortemont. The tide of night, the clash of human will, and the fraying of fear itself converged in that small village square, and somewhere, in the midst of smoke, shadows, and panic, Lemarchand realized for the first time that his empire might indeed be vulnerable. Chapter 9, The Reckoning Approaches. The village of Mortemont awoke beneath a fragile dawn, the air thick with unease. Even the gulls seemed subdued, their cries muted by the tension that had settled over the cobblestone streets. Windows remained shuttered, doors closed tightly against the unknown. Lemarchand's grip was present in every wary glance, yet the cracks we had forced into his carefully maintained network were evident. Holmes, seated at our usual tavern table, studied the ledger and the newly intercepted letters with his usual intensity. Every line of code, every notation, every shipment we had disrupted was meticulously recorded. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, traced patterns that even I had failed to perceive. "Watson," he said quietly, "the first threads are pulled. The disruption at the docks, the intercepted agents, the scattered shipments, all of it has forced Lemarchand to reveal himself. Every decision he makes now is predictable if we understand his reliance on fear and routine." Rue leaned against the wall, exhausted but resolute. "And the villagers? They fear him still, yet there is a shift. They move with hesitation, yes, but some glance toward the tavern as if seeking guidance." Holmes nodded. "Fear is fragile, and so is loyalty built upon it. Observe the subtlety of hesitation. It is a signal that authority can be challenged. Tonight, Watson, the center of gravity must be engaged directly." Etienne arrived, pale and breathless, carrying news. "He is moving tonight. Lemarchand himself will inspect the northern cliffs. His agents report anomalies, shipments delayed, papers missing. He intends to assert control personally." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Excellent. He will come into the position we have prepared. The traps are laid, the village paths mapped. His pride and overconfidence will draw him directly into the conflict we have orchestrated." I felt a surge of apprehension. Lemarchand, cunning and ruthless, was not a man to confront lightly. Yet Holmes's plan, precise and meticulous, offered us an advantage. Night fell once more, heavy and oppressive. The cliffs above the village were illuminated faintly by the moon, reflecting off the white spray of the surf below. Holmes, Rue, Etienne, and I moved silently, taking positions along the narrow paths we had previously mapped. Holmes whispered, "Timing is critical. Lemarchand's movements will follow his predictable patterns. Every hesitation, every glance, every command is observable, and when he acts, we act with certainty." From the shadows came movement. Lemarchand, tall and commanding, emerged with two agents, surveying the area and assessing for irregularities. The first agent approached a marked crate, while the second scanned the cliff edge. Lemarchand's presence was a palpable force, radiating control and menace. Holmes signaled for us to hold. "Let him make the first move. Let him believe the advantage remains his. We shall respond precisely, turning his confidence into vulnerability." Suddenly, Lemarchand barked orders, his voice slicing the night. "Check every crate. The shipment must be intact, every detail." His agents moved, anxious, their composure faltering under the tension we had created. Holmes's eyes flicked between the men, noting every pause, every hesitation. "Observe, Watson," he whispered. "Fear, when properly leveraged, can turn into chaos. He controls through intimidation, but when the network is disturbed, even the most disciplined agent falters." Rue, still pale, stammered, "Monsieur, he notices the disruption?" Holmes smiled faintly, calm as ever. "He sees the effects, not the cause, and that is exactly what we need. His overconfidence will force him into decisions without calculation, and from there, we guide him." Etienne moved quietly along the cliff path, ensuring that any potential escape route for Lemarchand's men was observed. I kept my revolver ready, heart racing, knowing that the final steps toward collapse were at hand. The first agent stumbled over a deliberately placed obstruction, a crate we had moved earlier. Lemarchand's gaze sharpened, his composure momentarily faltering. Holmes seized the opportunity. "Now, Watson, Rue," he whispered, "observe and act. The reckoning begins." A sudden shout from Lemarchand drew the remaining agent's attention. Holmes moved swiftly, intercepting one agent, disarming him, while Rue blocked the other's retreat. Lemarchand, realizing the disruption, barked orders, but his calm precision wavered under the pressure we had created. Holmes stepped forward, holding the ledger aloft. "Monsieur Lemarchand," he said, voice carrying across the cliffs, "your network, once thought invincible, has been laid bare. Every shipment, every agent, every coded letter has revealed its weakness. Mortemont will no longer tremble under your shadow." Lemarchand's eyes flared with controlled fury, but even he could not ignore the chaos among his agents. His grip over the village was fraying, and the center of his control, himself, was now visible, exposed, and vulnerable. As Lemarchand barked orders, trying to reassert authority, Holmes observed carefully, each hesitation of Lemarchand's men, each reaction of the agents reinforced the strategy we had set. The tide was turning decisively. "Courage, Watson," Holmes whispered. "Observation, deduction, and preparation have brought us to this moment. The collapse is imminent, and when it occurs, we must be ready to seize it entirely." The cliffs echoed with shouts and movement, the surf crashing below like a drum of reckoning. Lemarchand's empire, built on fear, secrecy, and control, was beginning to unravel before our eyes. And for the first time, I realized that the final confrontation, when it came, would not merely test strength, but intellect, nerve, and resolve. The night held its breath. Mortemont waited, and in the shadows, Holmes, Roux, Etienne, and I prepared for the ultimate reckoning. Lemarchand's eyes flicked nervously from the disrupted crates to the darkened paths where we hid. Even in the dim moonlight, I could see the faint twitch in his jaw, a sign of tension rarely observed in the otherwise composed tyrant. He barked orders, forcing his remaining agents to double-check the crates, verify the papers, and search the cliffs with frantic energy. Holmes observed silently, leaning slightly from his shadowed perch. "See, Watson," he whispered, "the cracks are now undeniable. Even the most disciplined agent is faltering under stress. The web begins to unravel precisely as predicted. Every step he takes now exposes him further." Roux shifted nervously behind me. "But the man himself, monsieur, he watches everything. He must know the network is compromised." Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. "Ah, but Watson, that is the elegance of this plan. Lemarchand sees the chaos, yes, but he believes he can still control it. Overconfidence is a dangerous companion. It blinds him to the subtler threads we are pulling, and that is where the advantage lies." Etienne, crouched along the cliffside, gestured subtly. Two of Lemarchand's men were moving toward a bundle of crates we had intentionally left exposed. The moonlight glinted off their weapons, and a faint breeze carried their whispered commands. "Patience," Holmes murmured. "Timing, Watson. Every second counts. Observe the patterns. They always betray themselves at the moment of crisis." Suddenly, the first agent stumbled over a rope we had strategically placed across the path, dropping a small stack of coded papers into the shallow grass. Lemarchand barked an order, but the commotion had begun to spread. The remaining agents became disorganized, unsure of which tasks to prioritize. Holmes gave a subtle signal, and Roux stepped forward, blocking the path of one agent attempting to recover a fallen crate. Etienne moved to flank the other, while I kept my revolver ready, though Holmes's calm presence ensured that the plan remained under control. Lemarchand's eyes narrowed. He realized the disruption was not random. "Englishman," he called, voice cold and dangerous. "Show yourself. Your interference ends tonight, or the consequences will be irreversible." Holmes stepped into partial moonlight, holding the ledger and several of the intercepted papers. His posture was confident, unyielding. "Monsieur Lemarchand," he said evenly, "it is you who are now vulnerable. Your agents falter, your shipments are compromised, and your network, once invincible, has been exposed. Mortemont can no longer tremble under shadows." The tyrant's face betrayed the first flicker of genuine unease I had ever seen. "You dare threaten me?" he hissed, moving toward us with measured steps, two agents trailing behind him. Holmes's eyes locked on Lemarchand's, his voice calm yet edged with steel. "Not threaten, monsieur. Inform. The truth has a way of finding the light, and tonight it has found us. Every shipment, every agent, every coded note, all revealed. Your control is slipping, and every decision you make now accelerates its collapse." Lemarchand's hands clenched and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You do not understand. Control is everything. Without it, there is chaos. Without it, men die, loyalties shatter, empires crumble. You will learn the cost of meddling in matters beyond your comprehension." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Perhaps, monsieur, but the cost of tyranny is always revealed to those who see clearly. And tonight, we see everything." From the shadows, the village itself seemed to hold its breath. Lemarchand's agents, increasingly anxious, looked between him and the small group led by Holmes, unsure where their allegiance should lie. Some moved cautiously toward him, others hesitated, the fear he had instilled now confused by the uncertainty in their ranks. Holmes gestured subtly, and Roux and Etienne moved to subtly block potential reinforcements. The chaos was deliberate, precise, and orchestrated. Lemarchand's control over the situation, once absolute, now felt tenuous. The first true crack appeared when one of Lemarchand's agents dropped a lantern in his haste, scattering papers across the cliffs. Lemarchand's eyes flashed with anger, but the misstep forced him to reveal more of his position as he moved to restore order. Holmes observed everything, noting each reaction, each flinch, each minor mistake. "Watson," Holmes whispered, "observe closely. The man himself is exposed. Each movement betrays intention. Courage and reason will guide us now, and the web he has spun will ensnare him if he does not act with care." Roux swallowed hard. "Monsieur, tonight it seems it could end for him?" Holmes's gaze did not waver. "It could, Watson, but we must remain patient. Even the sharpest blade is useless if swung hastily. The tide is turning, the reckoning approaches, and Mortemont will soon awaken to a new dawn." The surf crashed against the cliffs below, a rhythmic drumbeat that matched the tension in the square. Lemarchand's empire, built on fear and secrecy, was fraying at the edges. The night held its breath, and in the shadows Holmes, Roux, Etienne, and I prepared to deliver the final moves that would decide the fate of the village, and the master of the network himself. Chapter X. The Master Revealed. The night air was thick with tension, heavy with the scent of the sea and smoke from the small fires we had set at the docks and along the cliff paths. Mortemont slept uneasily, its streets empty, windows shuttered, and hearts beating in anxious rhythm. Somewhere in the shadows, Lemarchand's agents prowled, attempting to maintain order, but the disruption we had orchestrated had left them hesitant and uncertain. Holmes moved with quiet precision, the ledger and the intercepted letters secured under his arm. Etienne led the way, guiding us along hidden paths that twisted between the cliffs and the village. Roux's hands shook slightly, though his eyes betrayed the determination to see this through. "Watson," Holmes whispered, "the master himself will confront us if we have planned correctly. Every misstep, every hesitation, every reaction is visible. We do not merely intercept his network, we force him into a position where his own overconfidence becomes his undoing." I nodded, heart pounding, gripping my revolver, acutely aware that the culmination of nights of observation, deduction, and careful maneuvering had brought us to this moment. We reached a narrow square at the cliff's edge, where the waves below roared like distant drums. Lemarchand had anticipated our interference, but he did not yet know the full extent. A single lantern flickered on a crate, illuminating the figure of the master himself, tall, gaunt, and commanding even in the dim light. Two of his agents flanked him, weapons poised but hesitant. Holmes stepped forward, his calm, deliberate movements announcing presence without aggression. "Monsieur Lemarchand," he said, voice carrying across the square, "your empire of fear, your shipments are compromised, and your network, the very threads you relied upon, has been revealed. Mortemont will no longer tremble in shadows." Lemarchand's pale eyes flickered with a mixture of fury and calculation. "Englishman," he hissed, "you presume to teach me about control. Do you think a village, a dozen agents, a few mislaid shipments can undo a decade of order I have imposed? You are naive or dangerously bold." Holmes's gaze did not waver. "Boldness is measured, monsieur, by knowledge and observation. 10 years of order built on fear is fragile. Patterns, routines, reliance on intimidation, all predictable, all exploitable. And tonight, you have revealed your weaknesses." Lemarchand's hand gestured sharply, and one of the agents moved toward Holmes. In a swift, controlled motion, Holmes sidestepped, letting the agent stumble over a strategically placed crate, while Roux and Etienne moved to intercept the other. The square erupted into controlled chaos, shadows and lantern light flickering as the tide of confrontation reached its peak. "You manipulate the environment," Lemarchand spat, his calm veneer cracking. "But the master's hand is not so easily constrained." Holmes advanced a step closer, his voice low, sharp, and commanding. "You rely on fear, monsieur. Fear is fragile. Courage and reason are precise, inevitable, and today Mortemont shall witness their power. Every misstep of yours, every hesitation, has led you here, to the edge of exposure." The agents faltered, uncertainty in their movements betraying the careful discipline Lemarchand had enforced. Holmes observed, noting every pause, every glance, every split-second decision. "Watson," Holmes whispered, "observe closely. The center is revealed. His network depends on him maintaining composure. Every tremor in his authority is a signal. And now the collapse accelerates. Lemarchand's voice dropped to a hiss. You think you have won? You will see the cost of your interference. Holmes's lips curved in a faint smile. Not the cost, monsieur. The consequence of your own design. Every shipment disrupted, every agent uncertain, every route exposed. These are the results of your reliance on fear, and they are now your undoing. A sudden shout rang from the cliff path behind Lemarchand. One of the intercepted agents, panicked and isolated, revealed a cache of papers, codes, shipment records, and letters directly tying Lemarchand to his network. The master's face paled, recognition dawning. His agents glanced toward him, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. Holmes seized the moment. Observe, Watson. Mortemont sees truth tonight. Every thread you relied upon is now visible. You are surrounded, exposed, and at the mercy of your own miscalculations. Lemarchand's calm composure shattered. For the first time, I saw genuine fear cross his features. His agents, torn between loyalty and survival, wavered. The tide had turned decisively. Holmes had orchestrated every step, anticipated every move, and now the network that had ruled the village trembled under its own fragility. Holmes stepped fully into the moonlight, ledger in hand. It is over, monsieur. Every shipment, every coded letter, every agent compromised. You have relied upon shadows for a decade, but shadows do not last forever. Mortemont will awaken, and you shall answer for the fear you have spread. Lemarchand glared, pale and defeated, yet still proud. You may have disrupted my network, but the master is not so easily undone. Holmes's eyes gleamed with cold certainty. Even masters are revealed, monsieur, and tonight your empire of fear ends at the edge of these cliffs. The wind swept over the square, carrying the roar of the surf below. Mortemont lay in tense anticipation. Lemarchand, surrounded and exposed, faced the culmination of Holmes's careful orchestration, the inevitable collapse of the web he had so carefully constructed. For a tense moment, the square was silent, save for the distant roar of the waves crashing against the cliffs below. Lemarchand's eyes darted between the scattered agents, the disrupted crates, and Holmes standing with the ledger clutched in his hand. His lips pressed into a thin line. Every flicker of expression betrayed the first true taste of vulnerability I had ever seen in the man. Holmes advanced another step, deliberate, unhurried, every movement radiating calm authority. Observe, Watson. Every hesitation, every misstep, every faltering decision has led us to this moment. You cannot command through fear when the tools of fear themselves betray you. One of Lemarchand's agents, trembling, dropped a pistol into the sand and raised his hands. Another followed suit, leaving the master increasingly isolated. Lemarchand's glare swept over them, fury and disbelief contending with the faintest trace of calculation. You cannot control them? He spat, his voice strained. Holmes shook his head, expression unyielding. Control, monsieur, is an illusion. What remains is choice and courage. Those who were once instruments of fear now choose survival, and the web you wove, intricate though it was, has collapsed under its own fragility. Lemarchand's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might lash out, attempt a desperate escape. But Holmes, anticipating such a move, had already positioned Roux and Etienne to block every potential path. Lemarchand's options dwindled rapidly, each decision constrained by Holmes's strategic foresight. Holmes held the ledger aloft, turning it slightly so that the scattered papers spilled in the moonlight. These documents, he said clearly, reveal every shipment, every coded message, every agent under your command. The network you believed invincible is now transparent. Every corner of Mortemont knows the truth. Lemarchand's pale eyes darted over the papers, realization dawning. His agents looked at him uncertainly, their loyalty faltering. In that instant, the master of fear became a man faced with the consequences of his own tyranny. A gust of wind swept across the square, carrying the faint scent of salt and smoke from the disrupted docks. Lemarchand's composure faltered completely, and he stepped back toward the cliff's edge, calculating escape. Holmes, however, moved with swift precision, blocking the path. End of the line, monsieur, Holmes said, voice quiet but unmistakably firm. The empire you built on intimidation ends tonight. You have relied on fear, secrecy, and obedience, but all three have failed. Mortemont will awaken, free of the shadow you cast. Lemarchand's face went pale. You think you have won? Holmes's eyes gleamed. No, monsieur, I know it. Witness the collapse before you and see the consequences of reliance upon tyranny. Every agent, every shipment, every code has betrayed you. You are isolated, exposed, and powerless to reclaim what you have lost. Lemarchand's remaining agents, seeing their master's vulnerability, finally yielded. One by one, they dropped weapons, raising their hands in submission. Etienne moved swiftly to secure them. While Roux and I kept watch, the tension in the square finally beginning to ease. Holmes stepped closer to Lemarchand, eyes unwavering. Your network is undone, your tyranny exposed, and your empire of fear lies in ruins. Mortemont shall no longer obey shadows, monsieur. The time for reckoning has arrived. For a long moment, Lemarchand said nothing, his shoulders tense, his pride bruised. Then slowly, deliberately, he lowered his gaze. In that instant, I understood that the master of Mortemont had been forced to confront the fragility of his own power. The dawn began to break over the village, light spilling across the cliffs, painting the square in pale gold. Lemarchand was escorted, his agents accounted for, and Mortemont began to awaken to a new day. One free of cautious at first, began to emerge, whispering of the events that had transpired in the shadows. Holmes, ever composed, gathered the remaining documents, tucking the ledger carefully under his arm. The village will heal, Watson, he said quietly. The people have endured fear for far too long. Now they shall see that courage, truth, and reason can overcome even the most meticulous tyranny. I looked at him, still in awe of the orchestration we had witnessed. It was brilliant, Holmes. Every step, every observation, every calculated move, it led to this. Holmes allowed himself a rare, faint smile. Observation, deduction, and patience, Watson. Fear can control men, yes, but it is fragile, and even the master cannot resist the consequences of his own patterns when exposed. Roux exhaled, relief flooding his features. Etienne nodded, satisfaction evident in his posture. Mortemont, scarred by secrecy and tyranny, would now awaken to the possibility of freedom and hope. As we left the square, the first rays of sunlight glimmered off the surf below. Mortemont had survived the shadow of Lemarchand, and justice, quiet, deliberate, and precise, had been delivered. Holmes walked beside me, ever calm, ever observing, already contemplating the subtle patterns that might guide the village toward lasting peace. And in that moment, I knew that for every shadow, every tyrant, and every web of fear, there was a light guided by reason and courage, one that, in the hands of a mind like Holmes, could bring even the most formidable empire to its knees. Epilogue. Shadows lifted. The morning air in Mortemont was crisp, carrying the scent of salt and newly turned earth. The village, which had long trembled under Lemarchand's shadow, began to stir with life unburdened by fear. Windows opened, shutters lifted, and hesitant voices ventured into the streets. There was a palpable sense of relief. Cautious, yes, but undeniably present. Holmes and I walked along the cliff path toward the northern docks, now cleared and quiet. Etienne accompanied us, while Roux lingered behind, assisting villagers with returning disrupted crates to their rightful places. The sun glinted off the surf below, the waves crashing rhythmically, as if echoing the village's renewed heartbeat. Holmes's eyes scanned the horizon, not in search of danger, but of patterns, the subtle signs of a community finding equilibrium after a long period of upheaval. Observe, Watson, he said quietly. The village awakens not merely to freedom, but to the consequences of courage and reason. Fear may bind, but it is fragile. Courage and truth endure. I nodded, still in awe of the orchestration we had witnessed. It was remarkable, Holmes. Lemarchand's entire network, exposed and dismantled, without a single life lost among the villagers. The man himself, his fall was precise, inevitable. Holmes allowed a faint, rare smile. Control through fear is a house of cards, Watson. One disturbance, carefully applied, and the structure collapses. Our task was to guide, not destroy indiscriminately. Justice, tempered with reason, preserves life even while correcting wrongs. As we approached the village square, the villagers emerged cautiously, some curious, others wary. Lemarchand's remaining agents were escorted to the village outskirts, their weapons confiscated, their allegiance uncertain. The community gathered, whispers spreading of the events that had transpired under the cover of night. One elderly villager approached Holmes, her eyes bright despite the morning fatigue. "Monsieur," she said softly, "you have brought light to Mortemont. We can breathe again. The shadow has lifted." Holmes inclined his head. "The shadow, madame? was never absolute. Courage, reason, and observation persist even in the darkest circumstances. Mortemont's strength has been revealed, not taken from it. Etienne, standing beside us, chuckled softly. And yet, Holmes, it is remarkable how one man's mind can direct events so completely. Lemarchand underestimated the value of deduction. Holmes's eyes twinkled faintly. Deduction, Etienne, is simply the recognition of order within chaos. Once observed, once understood, the chaos is no longer unpredictable. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Holmes and I settled back at the tavern. The ledger and remaining documents had been secured, the evidence sufficient to ensure Lemarchand's capture and the dismantling of his network. Rue busied himself recounting the night's events, still slightly trembling, yet proud to have played a part in the operation. I sipped my tea, reflecting on the events. Holmes, there is a profound satisfaction in seeing the balance restored, the fear lifted, but I confess, I remain amazed at the precision with which you orchestrated everything. Holmes leaned back, fingers steepled, gaze fixed on the sunlight streaming through the window. The pleasure, Watson, lies not in spectacle, but in resolution. Patterns revealed, networks dismantled, and lives restored. The challenge is in anticipation, patience, and observation. Everything else follows. For a moment, the quiet of the tavern seemed absolute. The only sounds the clinking of cups and the murmur of villagers outside, reclaiming their streets. Mortemont, once bound by shadow, had awakened to the dawn of reason and courage. As we prepared to leave the village and return to the familiar bustle of London, I glanced at Holmes. Do you think there will be others like Lemarchand? Holmes's eyes glimmered, thoughtful yet steady. There will always be those who rely upon fear and secrecy, Watson. But the method remains the same. Observation, deduction, and patience. And for those who threaten the innocent, there will always be reckoning. We stepped out into the morning light, leaving behind the cliffs, the docks, and the village square. Mortemont had survived the shadow. Its people, cautious yet emboldened, would carry on, free from tyranny. And I knew, as always, that with Holmes at my side, the subtle threads of justice, reason, and courage would continue to unravel the darkness wherever it lurked. The tide had turned, the shadow had lifted, and for once, the world seemed a little brighter. Thank you so much for listening to our Honoring Audiobooks original Sherlock Holmes adventure. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure.